Welcome back to another story on No Harry. This time, we're bringing you, what if Voldemort's killing curse backfired again at Graveyard and freed Harry from all 38 bindings. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The night the graveyard burned, the portkey dropped them into darkness. Harry hit the ground hard, his knees slamming into wet grass, and for a moment the world was just the cold and the smell of earth and the distant sound of wind moving through old trees. Cedric landed a foot away, already straightening up, his wand out and his eyes scanning the dark. The Triwizard Cup glinted between them, its glow already fading back to ordinary gold. "Somebody's grave," Cedric said quietly. Harry looked around. Headstones rose from the ground in uneven rows, old ones, the kind that had been there long enough for the inscriptions to blur. A dark manor house sat on a hill in the distance, every window black. No light anywhere. No sound except the wind. Then Harry felt it, that particular cold that had nothing to do with temperature. "We need to go back," he said. "Now. Grab the cup." But the darkness was already moving. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a dozen black-robed figures stepping out of the shadows between headstones as though they'd been waiting there for hours, which they had. Wormtail was at the front, his silver hand catching what little moonlight there was, and he was carrying something, a bundle of dark cloth wrapped around something small and somehow wrong, something that radiated wrongness the way a fire radiates heat. "Kill the spare." The voice came from the bundle. High and cold and absolutely certain of itself. Harry spun toward Cedric. "Run!" The green light took Cedric in the chest before either of them could move. Harry watched him fall. Watched the life go out of his eyes between 1 second and the next, and for a moment everything else, the Death Eaters, the cold, the wrongness coming from that bundle, all of it receded behind the specific horror of watching someone who had been alive a heartbeat ago simply stop. Cedric Diggory, who'd been decent and fair and who had shared the cup because it was the right thing to do, lay on his back in the wet grass of a graveyard he'd never heard of, dead because Harry Potter had touched a portkey. Then the ropes came. They erupted from the ground itself, thick and magically woven, coiling around his legs and arms and chest before he could process what was happening, yanking him backward into the arms of a stone figure, a dark monument, a carved angel with its face worn away by years of weather. His wand arm was pinned. His wand fell into the grass. "Hold him," the voice from the bundle said. Wormtail moved toward a large stone cauldron that Harry hadn't noticed, already filled with some dark liquid that steamed despite the cold air. He lowered the bundle into it. The liquid hissed. Something moved beneath the surface. Harry pulled against the ropes. They didn't give. What happened next was something Harry would never quite be able to describe accurately, not because he wasn't paying attention, but because there aren't really adequate words for watching a man be born from a cauldron. The bone, the blood, the flesh, Wormtail's silver hand catching moonlight as it came down on his own arm, and then the rising, the figure standing upright in the cauldron with steam curling around it, tall and white and entirely wrong in the way a face can be wrong when it doesn't have a nose anymore. Voldemort stepped out of the cauldron. He stood for a moment with his eyes closed, just feeling the existence of a body around himself, the novelty of it after 13 years of something worse than death. Then he opened his eyes. They were red. Not bloodshot, not injured, red the way rubies are red, the way fire is red, with a quality to them that had nothing to do with human biology. "Harry Potter," he said, like a man savoring a meal. The Death Eaters were operating into the graveyard one by one, black robes and silver masks, forming a loose circle. Harry counted 17 before he stopped counting. Wormtail was on his knees, cradling the stump where his hand had been. Nobody was paying attention to Wormtail. Voldemort raised his wand. It was his old one, yew and phoenix feather, and he held it with the ease of someone picking up a tool they'd been reaching for their whole life. 13 years, Voldemort said, walking toward Harry with unhurried steps. "And here you are. Still wearing that same stubborn expression." He stopped a few feet away and tilted his head slightly, the way a reptile examines something before deciding whether to eat it. You look like your father. So I've been told, Harry said. Voldemort's lipless mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He died begging, you know. That's the part they don't tell you at school. You're lying. Perhaps. He shrugged, a surprisingly human gesture. I often do. But not about the things that happened in your parents' house. That's not something I need to embellish. He gestured lazily with his wand. Crucio. The pain hit Harry like a wall. It was nothing like a Dementor. A Dementor was cold and distant, something that worked on the inside. This was entirely physical, every nerve in his body screaming simultaneously, white and red and all-consuming in a way that reduced the entire world to the simple fact of agony. He couldn't help crying out. The sound of his own voice surprised him, how raw it was, how it echoed off the headstones. Voldemort lifted the curse after only a few seconds. He was watching Harry carefully. He said. Yes. The real thing. He sounded almost satisfied. Your father screamed louder. Harry's vision was still spotty, his body still reverberating with phantom pain, but he lifted his head and met Voldemort's red eyes. James Potter died standing up in front of his son, he said. Whatever noise he made, that's what matters. Something shifted in Voldemort's expression. Not anger exactly, more like reassessment. He'd expected something more broken. Admirable, he said, and he didn't sound entirely ironic. We'll see how long that lasts. He turned to address the circle of Death Eaters, raising his voice for them. 13 years ago, I was destroyed by an infant. By a boy who had no power, no skill, and no understanding of what he stumbled into. A fluke of old magic, of love, of sacrifice, all the sentimental forces that the weak cling to. He turned back to Harry. I have been resurrected with none of those weaknesses. He pointed his wand. Avada Kedavra. The green light crossed the distance between them in less than a heartbeat. And then the world ended. Not literally. But that's what it felt like, in the fraction of a second that followed, like something very old and very large had been holding its breath for 14 years and suddenly let it out all at once. The killing curse struck Harry in the chest. And the graveyard exploded with white light. Not green. White. A light so complete and absolute that every Death Eater in the circle flung their hands over their eyes, and Voldemort himself stumbled backward, the Dark Lord who had taken a body back not 10 minutes ago, and hit a headstone hard enough that the stone cracked. The light wasn't outside. It was coming from Harry. From inside Harry, more precisely, from somewhere so deep in his magical core that it had never had a name, never been touched, never been reached by anything because there had been 40 layers of binding and suppression and limitation piled on top of it since the night Voldemort first visited Godric's Hollow and unknowingly knit himself into the fabric of a 1-year-old boy's magical core. Those layers were burning away. Harry felt them go one by one, and each one felt like something very wrong being removed from a wound that had never had the chance to close. Some of them he recognized in the moment of their breaking, a cold, blue-gray compression that he'd always assumed was just the feeling of doing magic, the resistance before a spell would come, that resistance was gone. A low, droning binding that had sat like a weight in the center of his chest since before he could remember, gone. Something that had whispered, constantly and beneath hearing, wait, don't, stop, careful, who do you think you are, gone. Something else broke last. Something different from the others, something that hadn't felt like a binding at all when it was there, just like a part of him, a sort of quiet limitation on how much of himself he was allowed to reach for at any given moment. It was the most elegantly constructed of all of them. It was also the largest. When that one broke, the white light became something else entirely. The ropes binding Harry to the stone monument dissolved. Not slowly, not dramatically, they simply ceased to exist, thread by thread, like smoke in wind. Harry's feet touched the ground and he stood up straight for what felt like the first time in his life, and everything around him looked slightly different. More real. More present. The graveyard had a texture to it now, a magical texture that he could feel the same way you can feel sunlight on skin, every Death Eater in the circle a warm shape. Voldemort had a complex knot of dark and borrowed magic and something rattling and incomplete in a way Harry hadn't had vocabulary for before. He could feel his wand in the grass 6 feet to his left without looking at it. He could feel the boundary of the graveyard, the road, the old trees. He could feel Cedric's body and the enormous, irreversible silence of it, and something cold moved through him at that. Voldemort was back on his feet. The red eyes were wide, not in fear, not yet, but in the expression of a man recalculating at tremendous speed. "Interesting," Voldemort said. His voice was steady. Harry had to give him that. "What did you do?" Voldemort asked. Not frightened. Genuinely curious, the way a very dangerous scientist is curious about an unexpected result. His wand was still raised but he hadn't fired again. "I didn't do anything," Harry said. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up. "You did." He raised his right hand and his wand shot up from the grass and slapped into his palm, and several Death Eaters took a step backward without seeming to realize they'd done it. Voldemort's eyes tracked the wand. "That's not the magic of a 14-year-old. "No," Harry agreed. "It's not." "The bindings," Voldemort said, very quietly, almost to himself. "Dumbledore's work. I could always feel them when I touched your mind, those walls he'd built, you never could." The red eyes narrowed. "They're gone." "All of them," Harry said. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment the graveyard was completely silent, 17 Death Eaters holding their collective breath, and then the Dark Lord made a decision. "Kill him," he said. "All of you, now." 17 wands came up at once. Harry moved. He didn't think about it, didn't calculate trajectories or plan a sequence, he just moved and the magic moved with him, more responsive than it had ever been, more immediate, like the difference between shouting a command across a room and whispering directly into someone's ear. A shield expanded outward from him in a shape that wasn't the usual Protego dome, it was wider, lower, asymmetrical, and it caught curses from 3 directions simultaneously and bent them sideways into the ground with a crack of displaced earth. He apparat. He'd never apparat in his life. He was 14 years old and hadn't taken the test and had never once been inside an apparition lesson. None of that mattered. He was beside Lucius Malfoy before anyone had processed that he'd moved. He drove his elbow into Malfoy's jaw with the straightforward efficiency of someone who'd been raised by a man who believed in physical discipline, caught the falling wand, and apparat again. He was behind Voldemort. Voldemort spun with inhuman speed, the U-wand whipping around, and the curse he threw was not the killing curse this time. It was something Harry didn't recognize, something complex and dark that tore through the space where Harry's head had been because Harry had already moved again, was already circling, already thinking 3 moves ahead with a clarity that felt less like intelligence and more like the air had suddenly cleared after years of breathing something almost but not quite oxygen. "He's apparating without a license," one of the Death Eaters said, sounding genuinely offended. "Stop being useful observations and start being useful," another one snarled back. Harry cast something wandlessly with his left hand while his right sent a reducto into the ground between a cluster of 4 Death Eaters, and the shockwave lifted them off their feet. He wasn't trying to kill them. He noticed that about himself, the impulse wasn't there, not the cold kill or be killed drive that this situation might reasonably produce. He was thinking clearly enough to distinguish between fighting to win and fighting to hurt, and what he wanted to win was the ability to leave this graveyard with Cedric. That was the goal. Simple and clean. He started working his way toward Cedric's body. Voldemort let the Death Eaters tire themselves out against Harry's defenses for about 45 seconds, which Harry noted with a grudging respect for the efficiency of it, and then he spoke 2 words that silenced everything. "Stand down." The Death Eaters stopped. A few were on the ground. None of them had touched Harry. Voldemort stood in the center of the graveyard and looked at Harry with an expression that had moved past reassessment into something that, on a human face, might have been called fascination. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I'm getting that a lot tonight," Harry said. "I've been watching you for 3 years," Voldemort said. "Through my servant's eyes, through my connection to you, through every report I received. A mediocre student. Below average in most subjects. Reckless, impulsive, lucky." He tilted his head. "None of that was real, was it?" "It wasn't a question." "I didn't know it wasn't real," Harry said honestly. "No." Voldemort actually sounded like he believed that. "No, Dumbledore is more careful than that. He wouldn't tell you about the cage. Better to make you believe it was your natural state." He began walking forward, slowly, his robes moving in the cold air. "This changes things." "Yes," Harry said. "It does." "I could offer you something," Voldemort said. "Not alliance, I know better than to suggest that given the circumstances. But space. Time. A war doesn't have to involve you if you step aside from it." "You killed Cedric Diggory," Harry said. "The Spare," Voldemort said, without particular feeling about it. "His name," Harry said, and his voice dropped slightly in a way that made 3 of the Death Eaters on the periphery shift their weight, "was Cedric Diggory. He was 17 years old and he was decent and fair and he died because you pointed your wand at him and said 2 words. So no. I'm not stepping aside from anything." Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. "Then this ends differently than I planned tonight," he said, and raised his wand. The next 3 minutes were the most intense thing Harry had ever experienced, and he had ridden a dragon not 4 days ago. Voldemort fought with the kind of precision that comes from 70 years of practice and a genuinely brilliant mind, and even with the bindings gone Harry was still 14 and still learning the shape of what he could now do, and Voldemort was extraordinary enough that even a severely depleted, newly rebodied Dark Lord could make it interesting. The graveyard got worse. Headstones shattered. The ground tore itself open in 2 places. A yew tree at the perimeter caught fire and burned green. Death Eaters scrambled out of crossfire, which was more of a problem for them than for Harry because he could feel them all, their positions constant in his awareness, and so he never accidentally sent something in a direction he hadn't intended. Voldemort, to his credit, kept adapting. Every approach Harry used, he shifted away from. He was already learning. But he was also still operating on borrowed time with a body that was hours old, and Harry could feel the strain in him, the way his magic flagged slightly at the far end of a complex cast, the half-second recovery time that wouldn't have been there in his prime. Harry pressed that. He didn't press it cruelly, he pressed it tactically, kept Voldemort casting at a pace that cost him, kept himself moving so that the Death Eaters couldn't form any useful perimeter without getting in Voldemort's sightlines. And then Harry made a choice. He stopped fighting entirely. He lowered his wand, stood still, and looked at Voldemort across 15 feet of ruined graveyard. Every Death Eater froze. Voldemort froze. The green fire crackled in the yew tree. "I'm leaving," Harry said. "With Cedric. You can try to stop me, but you're going to exhaust your new body in the first hour of having it, and I'll still be standing after, and then you'll have to start planning your second resurrection." He paused. "Or you let me go tonight and fight this war properly, which is what you actually want. You don't want to win like this. You want to prove something." Voldemort stared at him. "You've thought about this carefully for someone who was tied to a statue 3 minutes ago," Voldemort said. "I think fast when people are trying to kill me." Another long silence. The burning tree popped and hissed. "Go," Voldemort said. The Death Eaters stirred with an audible collective ripple of shock. "My lord," someone began. "He'll come back," Voldemort said, and he was still looking at Harry with those red eyes, and there was something in his expression that had never been in any description Harry had ever heard of him. Not admiration exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that only exists between adversaries who have recognized each other. He always comes back. He lowered his wand. But when he does, he comes back to a war I have chosen and a battlefield I have prepared. Not this. He gestured at the ruined graveyard. This was a ritual. It's done. Let him go. Harry moved to Cedric's side. He crouched down and touched Cedric's shoulder and felt the specific terrible stillness of him. He closed Cedric's eyes, gently, with 2 fingers. Then he picked up the Triwizard Cup with one hand, keeping his wand hand free, and kept his eyes on Voldemort until the last possible moment. I'm going to end this, Harry said. Yes, Voldemort said. One of us will. The portkey activated and took Harry away. The last thing he saw was Voldemort standing in the center of the shattered graveyard in a body 1 hour old, looking after him with an expression that the Dark Lord would have described, if pressed and if he were being honest with himself, as something very close to anticipation. The graveyard after Harry left was quiet for a long moment. The green fire in the yew tree burned itself down to embers. Wormtail had passed out some time during the duel, which no one had noticed. Voldemort stood still, and the Death Eaters stood still around him, and waited. He had 38 bindings on his core, Voldemort said eventually, to no one in particular. Dumbledore placed them over 14 years. Each one carefully calibrated to the last. He was quiet for a moment. All of them are gone now. My lord, Lucius Malfoy said carefully, his jaw swelling already from where Harry had hit him, surely this is a setback. It is the opposite of a setback, Voldemort said, and turned away. Dumbledore has spent 14 years controlling his weapon. Tonight his weapon woke up and he doesn't know it yet. The nearest Death Eaters could see the very slight curve of his lipless mouth. When he finds out, the old man's careful plans are going to fall apart very quickly. And that is far more valuable to us than a dead Harry Potter. He began walking toward the manor. Collect Wormtail. Try not to let him bleed on anything important. He walked up toward the dark house on the hill and didn't look back, and the Death Eaters exchanged glances behind the silver masks, and none of them could quite identify what they were feeling except that it wasn't the celebration they had expected when they gathered here tonight. It felt much more like the calm before something very large began. The portkey brought Harry back to the Hogwarts Quidditch pitch in a burst of light, and he was standing upright when it did, both feet hitting the ground cleanly, no stumbling, no lurching. The stands were full. The noise hit him like a wave, cheering that turned confused that turned into something else, something lower and more collective, as the crowd saw what was in his arms. Cedric. Harry walked. The stadium lights were bright and they threw his shadow long behind him, and he walked across the pitch with Cedric's body in his arms and he didn't hurry. He walked steadily, looking ahead, the cup dangling from his right hand, his robes torn and burned in 2 places from the duel, his knuckles bloody from the mundane moment of hitting Lucius Malfoy in the face. The crowd went completely quiet. Dumbledore was already on the pitch before Harry reached the center, moving with the speed of a man half his age, his purple robes billowing, and his face. Harry saw his face from 30 feet away and saw the moment Dumbledore registered what was in Harry's arms and what that meant. He also saw the moment, half a second later, when Dumbledore's brilliant old eyes found Harry's and registered something else entirely. Something he was working very hard not to show. He could feel it from here. The place where the bindings had been. He could see Dumbledore seeing that the bindings were gone, the way you can tell when a window that has always been there is suddenly not there anymore, not by the absence itself but by the different quality of light. Harry, Dumbledore said, his voice carrying over the silence of the crowd. He reached Harry and put one hand on his shoulder, steady and warm and careful, the way you approach something you're not entirely sure about anymore. Harry, are you hurt? Cedric's dead, Harry said. His parents are in the stands. Dumbledore's jaw tightened fractionally. I know. He deserves to go home in someone's arms, not on a stretcher. Harry looked at him directly. Will someone tell his parents, or should I? Something moved through Dumbledore's expression that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite something else. "I'll see to it," he said quietly. He summoned 2 members of the school staff with a gesture, then turned back to Harry, and his voice dropped. "What happened?" "Portkey was a trap. He's back. Cedric died in the first 5 seconds. We need to talk." Harry paused. "Privately. Not tonight. When I've slept." Dumbledore's eyes searched his face. Harry let him look and gave him nothing except what was there: exhaustion, grief about Cedric, and a steadiness that hadn't been there 8 hours ago. Dumbledore looked for a long time. "Of course," he said. "Come to my office tomorrow." "I will," Harry said. Amos Diggory was making his way down through the stands, someone at his side, his face already going wrong in the way faces do when they understand what they're seeing but are still fighting it. Harry looked at Dumbledore. "The cup needs to be examined," Harry said. "It was a portkey. Whoever made it had access to it for at least a few hours." "That's your list?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Yes. And whoever put my name in the goblet needs to be in a room with you before the night is out." "I'm already thinking about that." "Good." Harry looked at him steadily. "Then we're thinking the same things." "Almost." That last word landed between them like something dropped from a height, small and quiet and felt in the bones. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened slightly and Harry held his gaze without difficulty, without the old reflexive wanting to please, without any of the comfortable deference he'd carried around this man since he was 11 years old. For just a moment, a very slight expression crossed Dumbledore's face that might have been worry. "Sleep, Harry," he said finally, with great gentleness. "We'll talk tomorrow." Harry nodded, and walked toward the castle, and was aware without looking that Dumbledore watched him all the way to the doors. The noise from the crowd picked back up behind him, confused and frightened and upset, the way crowds sound when the story hasn't gone the way it was supposed to. Harry walked through it without slowing, feeling everything: the press of hundreds of people's magical signatures, the burn of lights, the specific texture of Hogwarts' old magic layered into its stones and mortar, ancient and patient and enormous. He'd been walking through this castle for 3 years and never felt it properly. He stopped once, on the 3rd-floor landing, where a window looked out toward the forbidden forest and the grounds were just visible in the moonlight. He stood there for a moment and pressed his hand flat against the stone of the wall and felt the castle recognize the contact, just barely, a faint warmth in old rock. Ron and Hermione found him there. They'd been running, he could hear them before he saw them, footsteps on the stone stairs, and then Hermione rounded the corner and stopped dead at the sight of him, and the relief on her face collapsed immediately into something more complex when she took a proper look at him. She didn't say anything. She crossed the landing in 4 steps and put her arms around him, fiercely, the way Hermione did everything, and Harry stood still and let her and didn't pretend the contact wasn't welcome. "You're different," she said into his shoulder, very quietly, where only he could hear it. "What happened to you in that graveyard?" "A lot," he said. She pulled back and looked at him, and her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was running calculations at high speed, cataloging details, coming to conclusions. She looked at him for a long moment and he watched the conclusions arrive and watched her decide not to voice them yet. "Cedric," Ron said from behind her. His voice was rough. "Yeah," Harry said. "His dad's." "I know." Ron came forward and stood beside Hermione, and the 3 of them stood at the window for a moment without talking, looking out at the grounds, the moon on the black lake, the distant dark edge of the forest. 3 14-year-olds on a 3rd-floor landing at the end of the worst night any of them had experienced so far. "He said something," Harry said eventually. "Before I came back. About the reason I'd always struggled with magic." He paused. "There's been a reason. A deliberate one." Hermione turned sharply toward him. "We're going to talk about this," Harry said. "Properly. With everything on the table. But not tonight." "Who?" Hermione asked, very quietly. Harry looked out the window at the dark grounds of Hogwarts, at the school that had been his first real home, at the castle where Dumbledore lived and worked and made long, careful, patient plans. "Tomorrow," he said. "Come find me tomorrow." Hermione looked like she had several feelings fighting each other for the right to be expressed first, and in the end she settled on squeezing his arm, once, hard. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow." They walked back to Gryffindor Tower, and Harry went to bed, and for the first time in his life he lay in the dark and felt the full extent of what he was, not a cage, not a compression, not a measured and rationed and carefully controlled version of himself, but the actual thing, vast and warm and present, and instead of being afraid of it, he simply noted it. He was here now. He was awake. Everything else could wait until tomorrow. He closed his eyes, and the graveyard played back through his mind for a while, Cedric falling, the white light tearing through the bindings, Voldemort's red eyes adjusting to the calculation of a new war, and eventually exhaustion pulled him under, and the last conscious thought he had was not about any of that. It was about the way Dumbledore's eyes had sharpened on the pitch, and what, exactly, the old man was planning to do about what he'd seen. Whatever it was, Harry thought, slipping down into sleep, it wasn't going to work. Not anymore. Chapter 2, What Comes Back. The morning after the worst night of his life, Harry woke up at 5:30, which was unusual. He'd always been a reasonable sleeper even under terrible circumstances, some survival mechanism baked into years of the cupboard under the stairs, but this was different. He didn't wake up groggy or reaching for another hour. He opened his eyes in the grey pre-dawn light of the fourth-year boys' dormitory and was immediately, completely awake. He lay still for a moment and just listened. Ron was asleep 2 beds over, his breathing slow and heavy, arm hanging off the edge of the mattress. Neville was making small distressed sounds in the middle of a dream that Harry hoped wasn't about the graveyard, since Neville had no connection to the graveyard and the distressed sounds were probably about something botanical. The castle breathed around them all, slow and ancient, the particular silence of Hogwarts in the hours before anyone needed it to be anything. Harry sat up and pushed the curtains back and the cool air hit his face and he breathed it in. Through the dormitory window, the sky was the specific dark blue that precedes sunrise by about 40 minutes. The grounds were perfectly still. He got dressed without lighting anything, moving quietly around the room, pulling on clothes and tucking his wand into his sleeve with the ease of someone who'd been doing that unconsciously since the graveyard and found it felt right. Then he went down through the common room and out through the portrait hole, nodding once at the fat lady who woke with a loud snort and then a muttered complaint, and moved out into the corridor. What he wanted was to think, and what he needed to think required space. He went up. The astronomy tower at 5 in the morning was cold and empty and had a view of the entire grounds, the lake silver-black in the near dark, the forest a dense irregular shadow to the east, the village of Hogsmeade barely visible as a cluster of warm lights far to the south. Harry stood at the parapet and put his hands on the stone and felt the castle thrumming faintly beneath his palms. He started going through what he knew. The bindings. That was the center of it. That was the thing he needed to understand before he sat down with Dumbledore and before he made any decisions about what came next. He'd felt them break last night, all 38 of them, one after another in rapid sequence, like a row of locks on a door all turning at once, and in the immediate chaos of the duel he hadn't had time to inventory what exactly they'd been. Now he did. He closed his eyes and went inward, the way he couldn't have done 24 hours ago because there hadn't been enough of him accessible to do it properly. Now there was. His magical core was like, he searched for the right comparison and settled on this, it was like a room you've been living in your whole life that turns out to be 6 times larger than the walls suggested. The space was the same. The room had always been this size. But he'd only ever been able to inhabit a corner of it. He went through the bindings methodically. Some of them he could identify. The power limiters were the most numerous, 9 of them, layered at different depths, each calibrated to activate at a different threshold so that as Harry naturally developed and pressed against the lower ones they would break gradually and appear to be normal magical growth. Clever. If he'd never encountered the killing curse again, he might have spent his entire life breaking through them one by one, always feeling like he was progressing while never actually reaching anything real. The loyalty enchantments were subtler and more uncomfortable to examine. 3 of them, different in character from the power limiters, these weren't about what he could do but about how he felt about things. About certain people. A warm, trusting glow that activated whenever he was in close proximity to Dumbledore. A mild but persistent deference, not servility but the kind of deep-seated respect that bypasses critical thinking. And one that was harder to categorize, something that had made institutional authority feel inherently safe, the structure of Hogwarts, the Ministry, the established order of Wizarding Society, all of it carrying a faint enchanted endorsement. Those 3 made him stand very still at the parapet for a long moment. The Blood Ward exhaustion binding was straightforward. It had kept his body from ever fully recovering energy while he was at the Dursleys, a low-level drain that meant even when he arrived at Hogwarts each September he was already starting from a deficit. That one was almost more offensive than the power limiters because of how physical it was, how personal. The choice of tool. The Dursleys as instrument. The prophetic tether was the most complex and the most disturbing. He didn't fully understand it, even now. It was woven deep into his core, and it wasn't precisely a binding in the same sense as the others, it was more like a structuring, a shape that had been imposed on his magical development that pointed him toward a specific endpoint. Toward sacrifice. Toward walking into Voldemort's wand. It had been building that path for 14 years, subtly and patiently, making certain choices feel natural and others feel wrong, making self-preservation a slightly lower instinct than it should have been. That one was completely gone now. Its absence felt like the removal of a very quiet voice that had been always talking just beneath the threshold of conscious hearing. The last category he couldn't fully identify. Monitoring charms, mostly, not exactly bindings but threads that connected him to Dumbledore's awareness, keeping the old man informed of his emotional state, his magical levels, his location. They had broken with everything else when the white light tore through him, and without them there was a noticeable silence in the direction of Dumbledore's office. Harry stood at the parapet until the sun came up. By the time it did, he'd made 3 decisions. First, he was going to be honest with Dumbledore. Not confrontational, not aggressive, but completely honest, because anything less would produce a conversation that was 2 people performing versions of themselves rather than anything useful. Second, he was going to tell Ron and Hermione everything, because they deserved it and because he needed people he trusted completely and those 2 were the list. Third, he was not going to be angry. Anger was a tool. He was going to choose when to use it. He went back down to Gryffindor Tower and found Hermione already awake and sitting in the common room with 3 books open and a cup of tea going cold beside her and the specific expression she wore when she'd been thinking so hard for so long that she'd passed through distress and come out somewhere more determined on the other side. She looked up when he came in. "Sit down," she said. "I've been researching." "I know you have." He dropped into the armchair across from her and stretched his legs out. "What did you find?" She picked up the book closest to her, which Harry recognized as a volume from the restricted section because of the dark red binding and the faint smell of old magic that came off it when she opened it. He raised an eyebrow. "I wrote to Professor Flitwick last night," she said, not looking up. "At 2 in the morning. I told him it was urgent. He let me into the library at 3. She found the page she wanted. Magical bindings on a core. There are 4 types. Suppressors, which limit output. Behavioral enchantments, which affect instinct and emotional response. Developmental structuring, which shapes the direction of magical growth. And tethers, which are the most illegal of all, because they connect one person's magical core to another's will. She looked up. Dumbledore is one of 11 wizards alive who know how to construct all 4 types. Harry was quiet. "I'm not saying he did," Hermione said, and her voice was very carefully level. "I'm saying he could have. And I'm saying that what you described on the landing last night, 38 bindings, layers, all broken by the second rebound of the killing curse, that doesn't happen by accident. That's not natural accumulation. That's construction. I know, Harry said. She looked at him very carefully. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. Harry. She put the book down. If Dumbledore put 38 magical bindings on your core when you were an infant, that is, in terms of magical law, that's Hermione. She stopped. I know what it is, he said. I know exactly what it is. And I know why. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He was preparing me to die. The common room was very quiet. Outside, birds had started. The light was coming fully now, golden through the tower windows, catching dust motes and the edge of Hermione's hair and the cover of the book on the table. The prophecy, she said very softly. Neither can live while the other survives, Harry said. He's known since I was born that one of us has to kill the other. And he looked at that problem and decided the cleanest solution was a weapon that didn't know it was a weapon. Something that would walk into the right situation without flinching because it had no idea what it was walking into. He paused. A boy who believed he was ordinary. Who'd been made to feel ordinary at every turn. Who would fight with everything he had and still ultimately end up in the right place at the right time. Hermione's eyes were very bright. Harry, that's monstrous. It's also very logical, Harry said. If you're someone who thinks in terms of the greater good and you've accepted that one boy has to die for everyone else to be safe, then yes. You make him someone who won't run. You make him brave and loyal and self-sacrificing, and you don't give him enough power to change the outcome, just enough to get him to the moment. He sat back. Dumbledore didn't do it out of malice. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He did it because he loves people. He just loves them in the abstract more than the particular. Hermione stared at him. You sound very calm about this. I decided this morning not to be angry yet. Yet, she repeated. Yet, he confirmed. Ron appeared on the stairs in his pajamas, hair entirely architectural, squinting at them both. Are you two having an important conversation without me? He said, in the tone of someone who knows the answer. Yes, Hermione said. Sit down. Ron sat down, looked at Harry, looked at Hermione, looked at the restricted section book, and arrived at the correct general conclusion with more speed than he generally got credit for. Right, he said. How bad? Medium to very, Harry said. Does it involve Dumbledore? Yes. Ron processed that. Right, he said again. He reached for Hermione's cold tea, took a sip, made a face, and set it down. Tell me. Harry told him. The whole thing, the graveyard, the bindings, the white light, Voldemort's assessment of what had happened, the inventory he'd done at dawn on the astronomy tower. He told it straight, without embellishment, the way you'd tell someone something true, and Ron and Hermione listened without interrupting, which for both of them represented genuine effort. When he finished, Ron was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, 38. Yes. He put 38 separate bindings on a baby. Over the course of several years. Not all at once. Right, well, that's much better, Ron said flatly. He pushed his hands through his hair. My mum's going to be, she adores Dumbledore, she's going to, your mum doesn't need to know yet, Harry said. Ron looked at him. She's order. She's going to find out. She's going to find out when I'm ready for her to find out, Harry said. Not before. Because the moment this becomes general order knowledge, Dumbledore's going to be managing it, and the story is going to be shaped before I've had a chance to have one honest conversation with him. Ron and Hermione exchanged a glance, the kind that couples develop and old friends develop too, a shorthand that has evolved over years of navigating things together. Then they both looked back at Harry. Okay, Ron said. What's the plan? Hermione asked. I go to his office this morning, Harry said. Alone. I tell him what I know. I watch what he does with it. He paused. And then I come back and tell you both what happened and we figure out the rest from there. You're not going to confront him, Hermione said, and it was half question half statement. I'm going to have a conversation, Harry said. There's a difference. And if he tries to, I don't know, rebind you, or, he won't. Harry said it simply, as a fact. He's too smart for that. He knows that ship has sailed. He looked at them both. He's going to try something else. I just don't know what yet. Breakfast in the Great Hall was a quieter affair than usual. The school had processed overnight what had come back through the port key and the specific shape of it, Cedric Diggory's body in Harry Potter's arms, and the result was a subdued collective grief that made the hall feel smaller somehow, the noise lower, the clusters of students more contained. Cedric had been popular. He'd been kind without being soft, which is rare and recognizable even to people who don't have words for it, and his absence was being felt. Harry ate quickly and without much interest, aware of the glances from all sides, the whispered conversations that paused when he looked up. The Daily Prophet was on the table and he didn't read it. Hermione read it instead, and her face went through several stages that told him everything about its content without him having to look. Ministry's calling it a tragic accident, she said. Of course they are, Harry said. They're implying the Triwizard Cup malfunction was the fault of the tournament organizers. Not Dumbledore's fault, Ron said, not the Ministry's fault, definitely not Voldemort's fault since he apparently doesn't exist. Very convenient. They spell his name wrong, Hermione said. In the one line where they mention him. They call him, he who must not be named, and then they spell it incorrectly in the hyphenated form so it doesn't count as printing his actual name. She lowered the paper. This is deliberate policy. Someone at the Ministry gave direction. Fudge, Harry said. Almost certainly fudge, she agreed. Harry stood up and picked up his bag. Going to see Dumbledore. Back by noon. He left the hall through the side doors and took the stairs to the 7th floor, and the school around him felt different as he moved through it, more legible, somehow. He could feel the enchantments in the walls the way you feel air conditioning in a building, their function and direction, the way the moving staircases operated on a rotation that wasn't random but responded to something, the way the castle's defenses were layered into the very architecture. He ran his hand along a wall as he walked and felt the stonework hum faintly, and thought, I've been walking through this castle for 3 years and only now am I walking through this castle. The gargoyle outside Dumbledore's office was awake and watching him with its stone eyes. Sherbet lemon, Harry said. The headmaster is expecting you, the gargoyle said, and stepped aside. The spiral staircase carried him up, and Harry stood on it as it turned and thought about what he was walking into. Dumbledore had spent the night knowing what he'd seen on the pitch. That was hours of preparation, of deciding the angle, of choosing which version of this conversation to have. He was brilliant and he was experienced and he was deeply motivated to maintain a particular dynamic, and Harry had no illusions about how skilled he was at exactly this kind of management. The door was open. Harry walked in. Dumbledore's office was familiar in the way places are familiar when you've been nervous in them multiple times, the smell of it, the quality of light through the high windows, the soft sounds of the portraits and the silver instruments on their spindles. Fawkes was on his perch and lifted his head when Harry entered, and made a sound that wasn't his usual song, something lower and more complex, and Harry looked at him for a moment before sitting down. Dumbledore was behind his desk. He looked like he hadn't slept, which was probably true, but he'd changed his robes and his eyes were clear and the half-moon glasses were in place and he was, entirely and completely, in his headmaster mode, warm, attentive, and absolutely in control of the room. Harry, he said. Thank you for coming. How are you feeling? I'm fine, Harry said, settling into the chair. He'd always perched on the edge of this chair before, slightly forward, slightly deferential without knowing it. He sat back now and crossed one ankle over his knee and watched Dumbledore notice this without reacting. You look tired. It was a long night, Dumbledore said mildly. He folded his hands on the desk. I have a great deal to discuss with you. But first, and I mean this simply and without subtext, I am very sorry about Cedric. He was a fine young man. Yes, Harry said. He was. I spoke with his parents last night. A pause. It was difficult. I imagine so. Dumbledore looked at him over his glasses. You're different this morning, Harry. Harry looked back at him. Yes. The words sat between them. Dumbledore let a small silence develop and Harry let it develop with him, and neither of them rushed to fill it, which was itself a kind of communication. I know what happened in the graveyard, Dumbledore said finally. Not all of it, I will need your full account when you're ready to give it. But I know the relevant fact. His voice was very even. The killing curse rebounded a second time and in so doing broke every 38, Harry said. A pause. Yes. You know the exact number, Harry said. It wasn't an accusation. Just an observation. I do, Dumbledore said. Because you placed them. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, and in that moment Harry watched him make a decision. The decision to tell the truth. He could see it happen, not magically, just the particular settling of a face when it chooses honesty over management. Yes, Dumbledore said. I did. The portraits on the walls were all pretending to be asleep, which they weren't. Fawkes made that low sound again. Would you like to explain why? Harry asked. I would like you to understand, Dumbledore said, and the distinction was significant and Harry felt that Dumbledore meant it to be. Understanding and explanation are different things. An explanation can be offered without consequence. Understanding requires you to meet it honestly, and I think you're capable of that now in a way you weren't before. He picked up his wand from the desk and turned it in his fingers, the way he did when he was thinking. So I am going to tell you the truth. All of it. And I ask only that you hear it before you respond. All right, Harry said. And Dumbledore told him. He told it well. That was the thing, he didn't try to soften it excessively or justify it with excessive qualification. He told the story of the night Voldemort killed James and Lily, the night the prophecy activated fully and Harry became its vessel, the understanding that had come to him in the terrible days afterward of what the prophecy required. He described the bindings with clinical honesty, their purpose, their layering, the monitoring threads that had kept him informed over the years. He described the prophetic tether in terms that made Harry's jaw tighten, and he didn't look away from Harry's face when he did. He described a 17-year-old boy he had once loved and who had made terrible choices in the name of great causes, and the lesson he had taken from those choices, that power, unchecked and unguided, in service of the wrong values, destroyed everything it touched. He described looking at infant Harry and making the decision that if this child was going to become what the prophecy required, the only way to guarantee the world's survival was to guarantee Harry's. I made you a weapon, Dumbledore said. Not because I didn't love you. But because the world needed a weapon and you were the one the magic had chosen. He was quiet for a moment. I told myself that the bindings were protection. That they kept you safe. And they did, but they also kept you small. And I think, if I am completely honest, I preferred you small because a small Harry Potter was a manageable one. The words fell into silence. Harry looked at the old man across the desk. He looked at the tiredness in his face and the specific quality of it, which wasn't the tiredness of a bad night's sleep but the tiredness of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had only now, in this room, set it down. The monitoring charms broke with the rest, Harry said. You've been blind since last night. Yes. And you have no way to replace them. Dumbledore met his gaze. No. Nor would I attempt to. But you'd like to, Harry said. Not cruelly. Honestly. Part of you is looking at me right now and calculating what the safest approach is to the new situation, and, re-establishing some measure of influence over Harry Potter, is probably on the list. Dumbledore was quiet for several seconds. The part of me that has managed this war for 40 years, he said carefully, is never entirely off. I do not apologize for that part. It is why we are still here. He looked at Harry directly. But I am telling you that it is not what I want to do this morning. Then what do you want to do this morning? I want to look at you, Dumbledore said simply, and accept what I see. Harry held his gaze for a long moment. The room was very quiet. Outside, the Hogwarts grounds were bright with early summer sun, and somewhere below a class of third years was presumably being frightened by something in Hagrid's paddock. I don't forgive you, Harry said. Not right now. Maybe not for a while. I want to be clear about that. I understand. But I believe that your intentions weren't malicious. And I believe you told me the truth just now, mostly. He paused. The mostly refers to the fact that you didn't mention the death you were preparing me for. Dumbledore's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them there was something there that hadn't been there before, something very old and very tired and very genuine. No, he said. I didn't. The Horcruxes, Harry said. Dumbledore went completely still. I've been thinking since this morning, Harry said. About what he said in the graveyard, about the prophecy, about what you actually need from me that requires me to be both powerful enough to reach him and compliant enough not to ask the wrong questions. And the only answer that fits is that he's made himself unkillable, and the key to undoing that is something I'm connected to in a way that nobody else is. He watched Dumbledore's face. Horcruxes. Pieces of soul, anchoring him to life. And one of them is in me. The clock on the wall ticked twice in the silence. How did you, Dumbledore began. The connection, Harry said. I can feel him, right now, distantly. Not pain, just presence. Like a thread. It's been there my whole life and I always thought it was just the scar, but it's not the scar, it goes deeper, it's part of my core. He touched his forehead briefly. He made me a Horcrux the night he killed my parents. Accidentally. The curse rebounded and his soul split and a piece lodged in me. He looked at Dumbledore. And the endgame of your plan was always for me to let him kill me. To remove the Horcrux from the equation. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was beyond tired. It was something closer to grief. Yes, he said. And instead, Harry said, the curse rebounded a second time, the Horcrux broke along with the bindings, and here I am. He reached into himself, felt for the thread, and found it, thinner now, changed in quality, no longer the deep embedded presence it had been but something lighter, something that had lost its grip. He followed it inward and found its end, frayed and broken, like a rope cut midway. It's gone, he said, slightly surprised. The Horcrux is actually gone. The rebound destroyed it. He said it flatly, just reporting a finding, but Dumbledore's expression when he heard it, the enormous, shuddering relief that moved across it, told Harry everything about how long the old man had been carrying the weight of what he'd planned to ask. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. Don't, Harry said, not unkindly. Not yet. Dumbledore collected himself, and when he spoke again his voice was steady. If the Horcrux in you is gone, then the number of remaining Horcruxes is, how many are there total? Harry asked. I believe 7 anchors in total. The diary, destroyed in your second year. The one you carry, destroyed last night. He paused. 5 remaining. I have been researching their locations. I intended to, eventually, share this with you. Eventually, Harry said. When I felt the time was right. When I was in a position to do exactly what you needed me to do and not too much else, Harry said. He let that sit without hostility, just as a statement of accurate fact. We're going to change the way we work together. I expected as much, Dumbledore said. I want the Horcrux research. Everything you have. All the locations, all the reasoning, all the dead ends. I want it by the end of the week. Harry leaned forward slightly. I'm going to destroy them. That's still my goal, ending this war, stopping Voldemort, the same thing it's always been. I just want to do it as myself, not as a carefully shaped tool. Can you live with that? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and Harry had the sense of something vast shifting in the room, the weight of a plan that had been in motion for 13 years redirecting, adjusting, finding a new configuration. I can live with that, Dumbledore said quietly. I am not certain I deserve to. But I can. Good. Harry stood up. The tournament. Whoever put my name in the goblet, you were up all night, you know who it is. Dumbledore blinked, shifting register. I have a strong suspicion. Alastor Moody is not who he appears to be. Polyjuice? Harry said immediately. I believe so. I need you to trust me to handle this particular situation in the way I think will produce the most intelligence. He paused, and there was something almost deferential in his voice now that hadn't been there before, something that Harry recognized as genuine rather than performed. I'm asking your permission to proceed as I see fit. The strangeness of that, Dumbledore asking his permission, hung in the air for a moment. Go ahead, Harry said. But I want to be in the room when you have him. Of course, Dumbledore said. Harry moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. He turned back. The monitoring charms. The behavioral enchantments. If you want to rebuild trust, and I think you do, the foundation of that is complete transparency from this point forward. No secondary arrangements, no quiet management, no shaping the situation in ways you don't tell me about. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. If you're going to play chess, play it with me and not around me. That is a reasonable request, Dumbledore said. It's not a request, Harry said pleasantly. It's a description of how things are going to be. He left. Dumbledore sat behind his desk for a long moment after Harry's footsteps faded on the staircase, and Fawkes made that low complex sound again, and Phineas Nigellus Black opened one eye from his portrait frame and said, well. That was bracing. Be quiet, Phineas, Dumbledore said. He was staring at the door. Be very quiet. The fake Moody was exposed that afternoon in a sequence that lasted approximately 20 minutes and involved Dumbledore, McGonagall, Harry, and a modified Veritaserum, and at the end of it Bartemius Crouch Jr. was lying on the floor of the office in his own face, speaking in great, rushing, involuntary sentences about his master's plan, about the ritual, about the portkey. The real Moody was found at the bottom of a magical trunk, alive but barely. Harry sat through the revelation with the patient attention of someone who had already worked most of it out but needed official confirmation. He watched Crouch's face as he spoke, the fanatic certainty in it, the love, because that's what it was, it had the shape and temperature of love, for Voldemort, and thought about what it takes to make a person that, and whether it starts with the person or with the pressure that's applied to them. After, in the corridor, Dumbledore said quietly, You've been very steady today. I had a good morning, Harry said. You've already forgiven more than you said you had, Dumbledore observed. Harry considered that. I've separated the person from the choices. That's different from forgiveness. He started down the corridor. But it's a start. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and found Ron and Hermione where he'd left them, with Neville added now, who had apparently arrived sometime in the middle and been absorbed into the conversation without full context but was following along with more comprehension than he usually got credit for. Harry sat down and told them everything. The Horcruxes, the death that had been planned for him, Crouch, the fake Moody, the Horcrux in himself that was now gone. He told it all straight and let them react, and there was a period of about 10 minutes where the reactions were significant enough that Harry just sat back and let them run, Ron going through 3 or 4 different phases of anger and Hermione going very quiet in a specific way that meant she was revising large sections of her internal model of reality, and Neville sitting very still and looking at Harry with an expression that Harry recognized because he'd seen it before and it took him a moment to identify it. It was recognition. My parents, Neville said quietly, during a pause in the others' reactions. Everyone looked at him. They were tortured, Neville said. By Bellatrix Lestrange and the others. After Voldemort fell. I've always been told it was just one of the terrible things that happened during the war. Collateral. He looked at Harry. But if the war isn't over, if he was always going to come back, then what happened to my parents wasn't collateral. They were targeted. They knew something. The room was very quiet. Your parents were Aurors, Harry said. The best ones, my gran always says. Neville's voice was even. They'd have known things. About Horcruxes, maybe. About what Voldemort had done to make himself unbeatable. He looked down at his hands, then back up. I've never been angry about it before. I've always just been sad. But right now he stopped. Yeah, Harry said. I know. They sat together in the late afternoon light as the last days of the school year wound down around them, and something shifted in the room that had nothing to do with magic, some alignment between four people who were all, for the first time, seeing the same map and understanding its edges. So what do we do? Ron said. We go home for the summer, Harry said. We think. We plan. And in September we come back and we actually fight this war instead of reacting to it. He looked around at them. All right? All right, said Hermione, in the voice she used for things she'd already decided. Yeah, said Ron. Neville nodded, once, with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to be asked. Outside, the lake was catching the last of the afternoon sun, and somewhere in the castle a clock struck 5, and the school went on being itself around them, complicated and beautiful and compromised in theirs. Harry leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt entirely like himself. It was, he thought, an excellent feeling. He intended to keep it. Chapter 3, The Summer of No More. Number 4, Privet Drive looked exactly the same. That was the first thing Harry noticed when the night bus deposited him at the end of the street with a bang and a lurch that sent Mrs. Number 3's garden gnome toppling off its concrete mushroom. The houses were identical in their identical way, the lawns precisely edged, the net curtains precisely drawn, the cars precisely washed and precisely parked. The whole street had the quality of a photograph taken in a year when everything was fine and then never updated. Harry stood on the pavement with his trunk in Hedwig's cage and looked at the house he'd grown up in and felt, for the first time, absolutely nothing about it. Not dread. Not the old low-grade misery that had always preceded this particular journey. Not even the resigned determination that had replaced the misery in later years. Just the neutral recognition of a place he'd been before. A building. Bricks and mortar and a family that didn't particularly want him. He picked up his trunk and walked down the street. Uncle Vernon met him at the door, which was unusual, and for a moment Harry thought someone from the order must have spoken to him, some prearranged intimidation. Vernon had the particular red quality to his face that suggested recent stress, and his mustache was doing something complicated. You, Vernon said. Me, Harry agreed pleasantly. Hello, Uncle Vernon. You're looking well. Vernon blinked. In 3 years of increasingly strained summers, Harry had never opened with pleasantly. The blink gave way to a squint. Yes. Well. He stepped back from the door in the way of someone retreating tactically. Your aunt has dinner. Brilliant, Harry said, and carried his trunk inside. The house smelled of furniture polish and something roasting, and Aunt Petunia was visible in the kitchen doorway, her neck craned at an angle that suggested she'd been listening for his arrival for some time. She looked at him and then looked away, the way you look away from something that isn't quite right without being able to say exactly why. Dudley was on the sofa watching television. He'd grown sideways since Christmas, and his neck had developed a new fold. He looked up at Harry with the expression of someone awaiting the usual dynamic. Hi, Dudley, Harry said. Dudley blinked twice in rapid succession. Harry took his trunk upstairs. The room was exactly as he'd left it, which was to say cramped and functional and nothing like a bedroom a person would choose for themselves. He put his trunk down and opened Hedwig's cage, and she flew immediately to the window sill and looked at him with the vast amber judgment of an owl who has strong feelings about unnecessary travel by bus. "I know," Harry said. "I prefer you too." He sat on the bed and felt the house around him. That was new, the feeling around. Since the graveyard, his awareness of magical signatures had expanded to encompass not just obvious enchantments but the subtler architectural magic that ran through places, especially places connected to him. And Privet Drive, it turned out, was considerably more magical than it appeared. The Blood Ward was immediately apparent, a thick perimeter enchantment that ran through the foundations of the house and the boundary of the garden and connected, deep in its structure, to Lily Potter's sacrifice and Harry's own continued presence here. He examined it the way you examine a wall you've always walked past and suddenly noticed the brickwork of. It was elegant in the way Dumbledore's constructions always were, multiple layers, self-reinforcing, designed to activate only under the right conditions. But it had a flaw. Not a structural one. A philosophical one. The ward operated on the premise that Harry's continued return to this house was voluntary, and that the anchor point, the place where he could call home, was Petunia's recognition of him as family. What it didn't account for was that a Harry Potter with no behavioral enchantments suppressing his self-determination might look at the ward's requirements and decide to renegotiate them. Harry spent a companionable hour dismantling the ward's dependency on his suppression and rebuilding the connection on a basis of his own choosing, the house as anchor not because he was required to return to it but because he consciously designated it as one. The result was a ward that was actually stronger, because a binding accepted freely is always more powerful than one imposed, but that didn't require him to be here, didn't drain him, didn't operate through the medium of his misery. He was eating dinner by the time he finished, mentally, which meant he made the small talk expected of him and passed the mashed potatoes and complimented Aunt Petunia's roast in a tone of genuine and cheerful appreciation that left the entire Dursley family visibly disoriented. "You're not," Aunt Petunia started. "Not what?" Harry asked. She couldn't finish the sentence because the sentence was, "not the way you usually are," and saying that would require acknowledging that she knew what he usually was, which in turn required acknowledging how she'd had a hand in making him that way. "Nothing," she said tightly, and looked at her plate. "How's your garden coming?" Harry asked. She stared at him. "The roses on the south side looked good from the street," he said. "Yellow ones? New this year?" She stared at him for another moment and then something very small shifted in her expression, something that might have been human in a different lifetime. "Hybrid teas," she said stiffly. "They require special pruning." "I bet they do," Harry said. Vernon's mustache vibrated gently. Dudley stopped chewing for several seconds and then resumed with great caution. The rest of dinner passed in a kind of stunned domestic peace. After, Harry washed up because he felt like it, not out of obligation, not from the old fear of consequences, but because he was there and it needed doing and it gave him time to think, which was what he mostly needed right now. He stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the back garden in the evening light and thought about Horcruxes. He knew about the diary. Destroyed. The Horcrux that had been in him. Gone. That left 5, and Dumbledore had promised the research by end of week, which Harry intended to hold him to. He thought about Voldemort's methodology, the things he'd have chosen, the objects that carried meaning to a man who had spent his whole life collecting significance to compensate for having none given to him naturally. The diary had been a school artifact, a piece of his earlier self. The thing that had lodged in Harry had been accidental, a consequence of a curse going wrong. The remaining 5 would be more deliberate, more chosen. A snake, maybe. Something that moved through the world as Voldemort's agent. Objects with history. With power that predated him, so that the dark magic of the Horcrux was housed in something already significant, doubling the protection. He filed it for later. The letter from Ron arrived on the 3rd day. It was technically from Hermione, in the sense that the handwriting was Hermione's and the research quality was Hermione's, but it was signed by both of them and the postscript was entirely Ron. "Mom keeps asking if you're okay and I keep saying yes and she keeps saying are you sure, please write if you need rescuing from the Dursleys. Also Fred and George have started experimenting again and the kitchen smells like burnt caramel and regret. Harry wrote back on the same day, which he would not have done in previous summers because in previous summers corresponding meant attracting attention and attention meant consequences. He wrote a proper letter, 3 pages, covering what he'd been thinking about the Horcruxes and what he'd done to the Blood Ward and what he thought their approach to 5th year should look like. Then he added a page for Ron specifically about the Chudley Cannon's recent match results, which he'd looked up in the newspaper purely for this purpose, and sent Hedwig off with both. The monitoring charms arrived on day 4. He felt them coming before they landed, which was probably not what the Order had anticipated. 3 separate surveillance enchantments, different casters. He recognized Dumbledore's signature on one and thought the others might be Moody and possibly Kingsley Shacklebolt, going by the particular texture of the magic. They were well constructed. Subtle. Designed to be indistinguishable from background magical noise unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. Harry let them settle. Then he sat at his desk and wrote a note. Dumbledore, I can feel the monitoring charms. All 3 of them. I understand the instinct but I told you the terms. Take them off, or I'll take them off myself and we'll have had an unnecessary argument. I would rather not start the summer with an unnecessary argument. Harry he sent it with Hedwig. The monitoring charms were gone by the next morning. The following afternoon brought a different kind of visitor. Harry was in the back garden reading, a defense textbook he'd ordered, advanced 5th year material, which he was treating as a minimum rather than a ceiling, when he heard the familiar crack of apparition from the alleyway beside the house. He put the book down and waited. Mad-Eye Moody came around the corner of the garden fence, the real one this time, moving with his uneven rolling gait, the magical eye whirring in its socket. He looked at Harry with the eye and the eye went very still for a moment, doing its visual analysis, and whatever it found made the man's ravaged face do something complicated. Potter, he said. Moody, Harry said. I'd offer you tea but my aunt is watching through the kitchen window and it would end her. The magical eye rotated briefly toward the kitchen window, registered Aunt Petunia pressed against the glass in a state of subdued horror, and then came back to Harry. You got rid of the monitoring charms, Moody said. Yes. That wasn't, he stopped. Started again. Dumbledore didn't tell me you'd be able to feel them. Dumbledore probably didn't know I'd be able to feel them until I sent the note, Harry said. Come in. Through the gate, not over the fence, my aunt has a thing about her begonias. Moody came through the gate and lowered himself into the spare garden chair with the particular care of a man with a replacement leg who has learned not to trust garden furniture. He looked at Harry for a long moment. I spent 9 months in a trunk, he said. I know, Harry said. I'm sorry. Not your fault. He waved it off with the practical brusqueness of a man who doesn't have time for guilt that isn't actionable. I need to know what happened in the graveyard. First-hand, not Dumbledore's version, not the summary. What happened? Why? Harry asked. Because I've been fighting this war since before you were born, Moody said, and I've never in 40 years heard of the killing curse rebounding twice off the same person, and the fact that it happened here, now, with you, tells me something I need to think about. He pulled out a flask, took a drink, put it away. Also because I'm the best combat defense teacher in Britain and if you're what I think you might be, you need training that nobody in this school is qualified to give you. Harry looked at him for a moment. What do you think I might be? He asked. I think you might be the only person alive who has a real chance at ending this, Moody said. Not the plan version that Dumbledore had, not the walking into the right situation version. I mean actually choosing to end it. Having the tools. He leaned forward slightly. The question is whether you have the discipline to match the power. That's a fair question, Harry said. So? Yes, Harry said. I have the discipline. Moody looked at him steadily with both eyes, the real one and the magical one. Show me. Harry held out his right hand, palm up, and a small, contained flame appeared above it. That was nothing exceptional. Then he began changing it, shape, temperature, color, containment, cycling through variations with the ease of someone turning pages, each variation technically distinct, each one requiring a different kind of precise magical control. He ran through 7 variations in about 30 seconds, not showboating, just methodical. Then he let the flame go out and looked at Moody. The old Auror's expression was unreadable, which with Moody meant he was readjusting significantly. "Wandless," he said. "For most things below a certain threshold," Harry said. "Complex or powerful spells still benefit from the wand. But for anything in the intermediate range," he shrugged. "Constant vigilance," Moody said, and it came out differently than the catchphrase version, more weight to it, more genuine. "You need to be harder to track than you currently are. The charms I'd have put on you, I'd feel them and remove them," Harry said. "Right. Different approach, then." Moody drummed his fingers on the arm of the garden chair. "Can you extend your awareness? Feel magical signatures at range?" "Yes." "How far?" Harry thought about it. "Probably about 60 yards reliably. Further if it's something strong or something I'm specifically looking for." Moody was quiet for a moment. "That's not trainable from scratch," he said slowly. "That's something you have to be born with. The bindings were suppressing that too." "Among other things," Harry said. "Right." Moody stood up, which involved the chair creaking ominously and him ignoring it. "I'll come back every week. We train, but quietly. I'll tell Dumbledore because Dumbledore will find out anyway and lying to him costs more than it's worth." He pointed a gnarled finger. "What I teach you, you use smart. Not flashy. Smart." "Agreed," Harry said. Moody moved toward the gate, then stopped. "You're not angry," he said, not turning around. "Most people in your situation would be very angry right now. It's been about a week." "I know where my anger is," Harry said. "I'll use it when it's useful." Moody turned his head slightly, not quite looking back. "Good," he said. "That's very good." He disapparated from the alleyway with a crack, and Aunt Petunia appeared in the back doorway a moment later, looking between where Moody had been and Harry with the expression of a woman who has kept a very specific peace for 14 years and is watching it become complicated. "Who was that?" she asked. "A teacher," Harry said. "Good one." She made a sound that wasn't quite a word and went back inside. Dumbledore's research package arrived on day 7, exactly as promised, and it was thorough enough that Harry spent a full day going through it. 12 inches of notes, organized in the Dumbledore way, comprehensive, cross-referenced, beautiful in structure while containing several significant gaps that were clearly deliberate. Harry made a list of the gaps and sent it back with 2 questions. Dumbledore sent back 2 answers and acknowledged the gaps with the slightly pained precision of a man who was learning a new way of collaborating. They did this 4 more times over 2 weeks and each exchange was more useful than the last as Dumbledore gradually adjusted to treating Harry as a partner rather than a project. It was, Harry thought, like watching a very skilled pianist learn that the person they'd been accompanying was actually capable of playing the lead part if allowed to. The letters from Ron continued to arrive every few days and grew progressively more detailed and more panicked, not about anything terrible but about the specific low-grade chaos of the Burrow in the summer with all its inhabitants. Fred and George were developing something that the Ministry would absolutely not approve of and that was therefore guaranteed to be excellent. Ginny had apparently developed strong opinions about professional Quidditch that she was expressing with great passion and frequency. Arthur Weasley had discovered something called a mobile phone that he was taking apart on the kitchen table with the focused joy of a man who has found his purpose. Harry wrote back every time and meant it, which was different from previous summers when writing had been obligation. He was aware, reading between lines of Ron's letters, that Mrs. Weasley was trying hard not to ask questions through her son that she wanted to ask directly, and that the effort was costing her. He wrote her a separate letter one evening, brief and direct. "I know you're worried. I'm fine, genuinely, not performing fine. I'll see you before term starts. Tell Mr. Weasley that if he wants to understand the mobile phone he should start with the battery, not the antenna. She sent back a letter that was 3 pages long, mostly emotional, and included a care package that arrived by 7 owls because of the wait. Hermione was harder to read in letters because Hermione in letters was always trying to be more measured than she actually felt, packing her real thoughts into the margins of calm sentences the way you pack breakable things in newspaper for moving. But Harry had known her for 4 years and the real thoughts were visible to him even in the cautious phrasing. She was scared. Not for herself, Hermione's fear was always on behalf of something larger than herself. She was scared that the Ministry was going to make this harder, that Dumbledore was going to make this harder, that the people who should be allies were going to spend so much energy managing Harry that they'd miss the actual threat. Harry wrote back, "I know. That's why we're doing this properly. Stop worrying about me managing it and start thinking about what you want to happen in 5th year. What does the version of this that goes well look like? Write it out. All of it." She sent back 14 pages 3 days later. He read every word and made notes in the margins and sent it back with a letter that said good, but you're underselling yourself in section 4. Stop doing that. She wrote back one line, how did you know about section 4? He wrote back, because you always go cautious when you're most certain. It's backwards but it's consistent. She didn't reply for 2 days, which meant she was thinking about it seriously. Moody came every Thursday. He trained Harry in the garden and sometimes in the nearby park when Moody decided the enclosed space was insufficient for a particular exercise. The training was nothing like Hogwarts defense classes and everything like what Harry had needed for 3 years without knowing it, combat practical, brutally honest about weaknesses, demanding in a way that acknowledged strength without softening the demand. You hesitate on the lethal end of the spectrum, Moody said, about 3 weeks in. They were in the park at 7 in the morning, the dew still on the grass, no one around to observe a teenager and a man with a magical eye working through dueling sequences at half speed. Yes, Harry said. That's going to get you killed. Maybe, Harry said. But there's a difference between hesitating and choosing not to. I'm not hesitating. I'm choosing. Moody looked at him. You think you can take Voldemort down without killing him? I think there are more than 2 options, Harry said. Always. And the lesson that there are only 2 options is usually taught by someone who wants to control which one you pick. A pause. Then, circular disarmament chain with 3 targets, 1 mobile, Moody said. Go. Harry went. The training settled into a rhythm and the rhythm settled into Harry's days with a clarity and purpose that previous summers had never had. He was up at 6, trained with Moody on Thursdays, read on the other days, not just the defense texts but everything he could get his hands on, charms theory at an advanced level, transfiguration beyond the curriculum, potions work from a text that Snape would have had opinions about. He also started meditating. Not in any formal organized way but just sitting very still for an hour each evening and mapping his own magic, exploring the full extent of what the bindings had been suppressing, learning the shape of what he actually was. It was the most important practice he developed that summer and he couldn't have said exactly why it felt important, just that knowing the territory mattered before choosing how to move through it. Aunt Petunia found him at it one evening, sitting cross-legged in the back garden in the last light, completely still, eyes half closed. She stood in the doorway for a long moment and didn't say anything. When he opened his eyes and looked at her, she had the expression she sometimes got when she thought no one was looking at her, unguarded, complicated, much older than she usually appeared. You're different, she said. The same thing Dumbledore had said, but different in character, not analytical. Almost sad. Yes, Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Your mother was different her last year of school too, she said. She came home for Christmas and she was just, different. More herself. I didn't know what that meant then. She looked at him for a long time. I think I understand it now. Harry held very still. She was brilliant, Petunia said, very quietly. Your mother. I know I never, she stopped. I know, Harry said. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry, but the effort of keeping them that way was visible. I shouldn't have, she started again, and stopped again. No, Harry agreed gently. You shouldn't have. But it's done now. She made a small sound that wasn't quite anything. Then she said, "Dinner's in 20 minutes, in her normal voice, and went back inside. Harry sat in the garden until the last light went and thought about what it means to carry old grief forward into new days, and how much of the architecture of a life can be built on the foundations of something that should have been let go years ago. He went inside for dinner and complimented the chicken, and meant it. The letter from Dumbledore arrived in the 3rd week of August, and it contained 2 things, the remainder of the Horcrux research, complete this time with no visible gaps, and a note that said simply, "There are developments at the Ministry that will affect the start of term. I will write again when I have more. In the meantime, trust that I am not managing this situation. I am responding to it. There is a difference, and I understand now that it matters to you." Harry read it twice. Then he wrote back, "I know the difference. Thank you." Sirius arrived 4 days before the end of summer. He came over the fence at 11 at night as a large black dog, which Harry felt coming from 30 yards out and therefore was waiting for at the back door, 2 mugs of tea made. The dog became Sirius Black in the kitchen with the slightly untidy quality Sirius always had in his animagus transformation, like a page that had been turned too quickly. He looked better than Harry had seen him look in years. Still thin, Azkaban had carved things out of him that food and time could only partially restore, but his eyes were clear and the manic edge that had been in them at the end of 3rd year was gone, replaced by something steadier. He took the tea and looked at Harry and did the same thing everyone did now, the slight recalibration, the adjustment. "You got my letters," Harry said. "All 4 of them," Sirius said. He sat at the kitchen table and wrapped his hands around the mug. "The first one I had to read 3 times. Which part got you?" "The part where you told me about the Horcrux and the fact that it's gone," Sirius said. He looked up. "Harry. Do you understand what that means? What it was going to require of you before?" "Yes," Harry said quietly. "I know." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "Are you all right? Actually, properly all right?" "Yes," Harry said, and the directness of it, the absence of qualification or deflection, was its own kind of answer. He could see Sirius receive it. "Okay," Sirius said. He took a long drink of tea. "Then I need to tell you things I should have told you 2 years ago." "Good," Harry said. "I need to tell you things too." They sat at the Dursley kitchen table until 2 in the morning and talked. Really talked, the way adults talk when they've stopped performing E's for each other, about James and Lily, about the First War, about what Sirius knew of Voldemort's methods and his objects and his weaknesses. About the Order and who could be trusted on a good day and who was reliably going to do what the Ministry told them regardless of whether it was right. About what a 14-year-old boy had been shaped to be, and what a 15-year-old one was choosing instead. At 2 in the morning Sirius said, quietly, "Your father would be, he'd have a lot to say about Dumbledore, you understand. Most of it I couldn't repeat in polite company." "I know," Harry said. "And the rest?" Sirius was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was doing several things at once, grief and love and something like awe, and the specific sadness of a man who missed his best friend and was simultaneously sitting across from the closest thing in the world to seeing him again. "The rest," Sirius said carefully, "would be that he's proud. In the way James was always proud, not about power, not about what you can do, but about who you're choosing to be." He paused. "He would say you're being very much yourself." "Good," Harry said. "That's the plan." Sirius left before dawn, back over the fence as the dog, and Harry stood in the kitchen for a while after the garden settled and thought about his father standing in a house that no longer existed and his mother coming home different her last year of school and the way both of them had died without knowing they'd made something that would spend 14 years in a cage and walk out the other side of it ready. He thought, "I'll make it worth it." He went upstairs and packed his trunk for Hogwarts, organized and efficient, every book in its place. He tucked Hermione's 14 pages of plans into the front pocket of his robes. Tomorrow was September 1st. He was ready. Chapter 4, The Lion Unchained. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock exactly, which it always did, punctuality being one of the few things in the magical world that operated with genuine consistency. Harry found a compartment near the middle of the train, stowed his trunk, and settled in with his legs stretched out before Ron and Hermione had even made it through the barrier. They arrived together, slightly out of breath, Hermione clutching a stack of books that suggested she'd been using the last 30 seconds of the platform to read, Ron pulling a trolley with one wool that was making its feelings known loudly. "You're already sitting," Ron said. "I've been here 4 minutes," Harry said. "How did you even? The barrier was jammed, we had to wait for the Patil twins to." Ron gave up on the sentence and shoved his trunk into the overhead rack with the decisive energy of someone abandoning a thought. "Never mind. You look annoyingly well rested." "I slept on the car ride," Harry said. Hermione sat down and immediately opened one of her books to a page she'd already marked, which meant she'd prepared this conversation in advance. Harry waited. "Right," she said, not looking up immediately. "I've been thinking about the year." "I know," Harry said. 14 pages. 15, actually. I added a page on the train." She looked up. "The Ministry is going to send someone. The Rita Skeeter articles over the summer have been building towards something. There were 4 of them, Harry, for all questioning your credibility, all citing unnamed Ministry sources, all running the same line about unstable traumatized students misidentifying Death Eaters and, Hermione," Harry said. She stopped. "I know," he said again. "I've read all 4 of them. And it's fudge, and it's fear, and it's going to get worse before it gets better." He looked at her steadily. "Which is why the thing you outlined in Section 4 of your plan is the right approach. The one you went cautious on." She looked at him for a moment, then closed the book. "You want to start the DA?" "Not the DA yet," Harry said. "First I want to see who they send. What their angle is. Then we respond to what they actually do rather than what we assume they'll do." Ron looked between them. "What's Section 4? "We train people," Hermione said. "Properly. Not Lockhart defense or theory only, actual combat-ready defense. A student group." Ron thought about this. "Like a secret club." "Like a practical necessity," Harry said. "Voldemort's back and the Ministry is about to spend the year pretending he isn't. That means every student in this school is going to be unprepared for what's coming unless we do something about it." He paused. "And we're 15. We're technically not supposed to be doing any of this. When has that ever stopped us?" Ron said. Neville appeared in the compartment doorway, slightly pink, with Luna Lovegood behind him looking dreamily at the passing scenery as though she hadn't quite committed yet to being inside the train. "Room for 2?" Neville asked. "Always," Harry said. They piled in. Luna sat down and produced a magazine from somewhere, The Quibbler, upside down, which Harry had come to understand was deliberate rather than accidental, and Neville took the seat beside Ron with the careful posture of someone who had something to say and was working up to it. "I've been practicing," Neville said, about 30 seconds later. "I know," Harry said. "Your last 3 letters." Neville looked surprised that Harry had noticed. I'm not great, but I'm better. My gran got me a private charms tutor over the summer. And I've been reading the advanced defense texts." "Good," Harry said simply. Neville looked at him for a moment, and the expression on his face was the same one from the common room back in June, that recognition. "What are we doing this year?" he asked, very directly, which was unusual enough for Neville that it made Ron glance at him. "Fighting back," Harry said. Quietly at first. Then less quietly. Luna lowered the Quibbler and looked at Harry from over its edge with her large, pale eyes. The Raxperts are going to be particularly bad this year, she said. They tend to cluster around government interference. There was a brief pause. That's actually quite apt, Hermione said. Most things are, Luna said pleasantly, and went back to her magazine. The train pulled into Hogsmeade Station in the early evening under a sky that had gone overcast and grey, and the first carriages carried them up to the school through the gathering dark. Harry watched the Thestrals pull the carriage with the particular clarity he'd had since third year, when Cedric, he stopped that thought and redirected it. Cedric would be better honored by what came next than by grief getting in the way of it. The Great Hall had been rearranged slightly, a low platform added at the head, and on the platform stood a woman Harry had never seen before and would have found deeply alarming even without context. She was small and squat in a way that suggested compactness rather than softness, and she was dressed entirely in pink, not a gentle pink, but a pink of aggressive cheerfulness, the pink of something trying to convince you that everything was fine through sheer chromatic insistence. Her hair was set in careful curls. Her hands were folded. Her smile was the smile of someone who had practiced it in front of a mirror until it stopped requiring effort. Harry looked at her and felt, with the immediate clarity of his expanded awareness, something that he could only describe as bureaucratic wrongness, not the dark magic wrongness of a Death Eater, nothing as dramatic as that, but the specific quality of a person who had spent so long inside a system that they had become the system, who experienced individual humans not as people but as problems to be resolved or elements to be managed. Dolores Umbridge, Hermione said very quietly beside him, in the tone of someone who has researched a thing and found it worse than expected. Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. She's our new defense teacher, Harry said. Hermione looked at him. How do you know that? Because they wouldn't send the Senior Undersecretary to the Minister to teach herbology, Harry said. Defense is where they need the influence. Control what students learn about fighting and you control what they think is possible. Dumbledore gave his welcome speech, which was warm and brief in the Dumbledore way, and then gave Umbridge the floor, which produced a short sharp sound from the high table as McGonagall set down her goblet with slightly more force than the surface required. Umbridge spoke. The speech was impressive in its way, meticulous in its casualness, each word placed precisely where it would do the most work. The overall effect of it being that change was good and tradition was important and the Ministry of Magic had the welfare of every student absolutely at heart and some recent unfortunate incidents should not be allowed to unsettle young minds when there were qualified adults ready to provide appropriate guidance and perspective. Harry ate his roast chicken and listened carefully to every word. What she was saying, underneath the pink and the careful smile, was this: Dumbledore is losing his grip, we are taking control. Your new defense teacher is a ministry official, and anyone who publicly disagrees with the official narrative about recent events will find the year unpleasant. Harry looked down the table and caught Neville's eye and nodded very slightly. Neville looked back steadily and nodded once. Ron was eating but his jaw had gone tight in a way that meant he'd followed it too. Hermione had stopped eating entirely and was looking at Umbridge with the expression she got when she encountered a logical structure that was both wrong and internally consistent, which she found more offensive than one that was simply wrong. When do we start the group? Ron said quietly. Give it 2 weeks, Harry said. Let's see her first lesson. Her first lesson was the next morning, and it was as instructive as Harry had expected, in the same way that watching a building's foundations is instructive about why the roof is doing what the roof is doing. She had them open books. Umbridge stood at the front in her pink cardigan with her hands folded and instructed them to read Chapter 1 of Defensive Magical Theory by Wilbert Slinkard, a text Harry had read in July and found so aggressively neutral on the subject of actual defense that it barely qualified as relevant. Nobody raised their hand. Then Hermione raised her hand. Yes. Umbridge said, with the smile. We've done almost no practical work since third year, Hermione said, her voice perfectly even. With the current climate, Umbridge said, and the way she said it did something very specific, it acknowledged the phrase while simultaneously indicating that it was being filed under hysterical overreaction. The Ministry of Magic, my dear, is fully equipped to address whatever challenges our community faces. Students benefit most from a thorough grounding in theory. The smile widened slightly. Practical defense is not on the curriculum this year. The classroom absorbed that in silence. Harry had been looking out the window during this exchange. Now he turned back and looked at Umbridge directly, and the quality of his attention, calm, complete, entirely unimpressed, crossed the room in a way that made her expression shift fractionally. She was accustomed to students who were nervous. She was accustomed to discomfort expressed as fidgeting, as small rebellions, as the adolescent performance of dissatisfaction. She was not accustomed to a 15-year-old looking at her the way a person looks at a problem they are already in the process of solving. She looked at him. "Mr. Potter. You have something to add?" "Not right now," Harry said pleasantly. "Thank you." She held his gaze for a moment, and the smile didn't change but something behind it did. 2 weeks. The first meeting of what became Dumbledore's army was held in a Hogsmeade pub called the Hog's Head on a wet Saturday in October, and Harry had 27 people in a back room by the time the hour was up. He hadn't recruited aggressively. He'd said a word to Neville, who'd said a word to Ginny, who'd said a word to a handful of others, and the information had spread the way genuinely useful information always spreads, through networks of people who already knew they needed the thing being offered. Harry stood at the front of the room and looked at them. 5th years, 6th years, a handful of 7th years. Gryffindors and Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs, no Slytherins, which didn't particularly surprise him, though he suspected there were 1 or 2 in the house who might have come if the invitation had been extended differently. He thought about extending it differently in the future. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said, and the room settled immediately, the murmur of conversation stopping with the ease of people who had been waiting for exactly this. "Voldemort is back. I know the Ministry is saying he isn't. I know the Prophet has spent the summer implying that I'm unreliable at best and delusional at worst. I'm not going to spend time on that because it doesn't matter whether you believe me. What matters is that you know how to protect yourselves and the people you care about regardless of what's actually happening outside this pub." A hand went up. Hannah Abbott, Hufflepuff, steady-eyed. "Why you? Why are you the one teaching?" "Because I'm good at it," Harry said. "And because I'm not going to teach you what the Ministry wants you to know. I'm going to teach you what works." A beat. "Show us something," said a 6th-year Ravenclaw whose name Harry didn't know yet. Harry raised his right hand without a wand and produced a fully corporeal Patronus, his stag stepping out into the dim air of the Hog's Head and moving through the room with the specific warmth of conjured protection, its light touching every face in the space. The room was very quiet. "That's the standard," Harry said. "Not for the first session, for what we're working toward. Every single person in this room is capable of producing something like that with the right approach and enough practice." He looked around at them. "The Patronus is for Dementors. The rest of what I'll teach you is for Death Eaters, which is more likely to be what you need." He paused. "Any other questions before we start?" Nobody asked anything. The stag walked a slow circuit of the room and then dissolved. "Good," Harry said. "Pair up." The next hour was revelation. Not in a dramatic sense, nobody had a spontaneous breakthrough, nobody suddenly mastered something they'd struggled with for years. But the quality of attention in the room was extraordinary, the particular focus of people who understood that what they were learning was not academic. Harry moved between pairs, adjusting stances and wand angles and the mental approach to spells, and his instructions were specific and physical and stripped of the theoretical scaffolding that Hogwarts defense had always wrapped around practical technique. Neville produced the clearest shield charm he'd managed in 5 years of trying. He stood back from it and looked at it with an expression that was complex, and Harry let him have the moment without comment. He found Ginny Weasley in the corner working on a reductor curse with the focused intensity of someone who'd been wanting to learn this for longer than the session suggested. "Your stance is shifting right when you cast," Harry said. "I know," she said. "It's because my left foot doesn't want to stay planted. So plant it differently. Try moving it forward, not back." He demonstrated, and she adjusted and cast again, and the resulting spell hit the target with considerably more authority. She looked at the scorched mark on the wall and smiled, a quick bright smile that she immediately turned back to business. "Can I ask you something?" she said, not looking up from resetting her stance. "Yes. Are you actually not scared of anything anymore?" She said it directly, looking up, and her voice wasn't incredulous, more genuinely curious, one person calibrating another. "I'm scared of some things," Harry said. "But none of them are in this building." She looked at him for a moment. "That's got to be a nice feeling." "It's a new feeling," he said. "Give me a year." She laughed, genuine and quick, and went back to her reductor curses. Umbridge found out about the group 17 days after its first meeting, which was faster than Harry had expected and slower than Hermione had feared. She announced it at breakfast through a new educational decree posted on every notice board in the school simultaneously, which suggested she'd either stayed up all night writing the same thing 20 times or had access to a copying charm more efficient than anything the students were taught. The decree banned all student organizations not approved in writing by the High Inquisitor, which was a new title she had apparently given herself sometime between dinner and sunrise. Harry read the decree, finished his eggs, and went to class. He did not cancel the next session. He moved it. The room of requirement, which Dobby had mentioned to him in a note slipped under his dormitory door 3 days after term started, because Dobby had apparently decided that loyalty ran beyond formal employment, turned out to be everything the Hog's Head wasn't. Warm, lit, equipped. Cushioned practice dummies materialized without being asked for. The bookshelves along the walls had filled themselves with exactly the texts Harry would have chosen if he'd been given a month and a library budget. He stood in the doorway the first time and looked at it and thought, the castle has been waiting for this. The group grew. 32 members by October's end. 37 by November. Harry learned each of them, not just their names but their specific magical signatures, their tendencies, their blocks. He taught them as individuals, not as a class, which was radically different from everything they'd experienced in formal defense and produced results that were radically different in turn. He pushed them hard. Not beyond their ability, Harry's expanded awareness was excellent at calibrating the edge of someone's capability, the point just past comfortable that was still productive. He pushed them to that edge and held them there, and the group grew collectively and the individuals grew privately, and the room of requirement became the most important classroom in Hogwarts in a way that had nothing to do with official curriculum. Umbridge conducted her inquisition of the staff in parallel. She sat in on classes with a clipboard and wrote things in her neat little writing and asked questions afterward that were ostensibly about pedagogy but were actually about loyalty, and one by one the staff responded to her with the particular variety of polite hostility that British institutions develop when the bureaucracy comes for the thing they love. Harry watched Snape's inspected lesson with particular attention. Snape taught the inspected class exactly as he always taught, which was brilliantly, in the specific way that Snape's cruelty and his knowledge were so thoroughly mixed that separating them required a level of patience most students didn't have. Umbridge sat at the back with her clipboard and wrote things, and at the end asked Snape several questions about his teaching philosophy. Snape's responses were technically cooperative and atmospherically devastating. He answered each question precisely and completely and managed to convey, without saying a word that was not entirely professional, that he found the entire exercise approximately as significant as a first year asking him to explain water. Harry, watching from the doorway after his own class had been dismissed, caught Snape's eye for just a moment in the corridor. Snape looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. His expression was unreadable, which for Snape meant he was reading Harry and didn't want Harry to know it. Then he turned away and swept off down the corridor, robes moving with their characteristic dark purpose. Harry filed that away. The OWL preparation ran in parallel with the DA sessions, which required organization, and organization was something Harry had discovered he was considerably better at than his previous grade suggested. Hermione had opinions about this. "You've been getting ES and outstandings consistently since September," she said, 3 weeks into term, spreading her notes across the common room table like a general deploying forces. "Not just in defense. In everything. McGonagall actually stopped class twice last week to ask you to elaborate on something." "I know," Harry said. You're not, I mean, she stopped. Are you going to talk to anyone about the gap? Between what your grades looked like before and what my grades looked like, what the bindings allowed them to look like, Harry said. I was suppressed, Hermione. It's not that I'm suddenly doing better. It's that I'm finally doing what I could always do. She looked at him for a long moment, and the expression on her face was complicated, something glad and something that was adjacent to guilt, the specific guilt of a person who loves someone and asks themselves what they missed. Don't, Harry said, reading it. Don't what? Whatever you're about to feel bad about. He met her eyes. You couldn't have known. Nobody could have except Dumbledore. You were never failing me. Her jaw tightened briefly, which was how Hermione managed things she needed to not cry about in public. I know, she said crisply, and turned back to her notes. Ron, beside her, caught Harry's eye and gave a small nod that conveyed, very efficiently, thank you, I've been trying to tell her that for weeks. The first Quidditch game was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, and it was therefore guaranteed to be eventful before anyone mounted a broom. Harry flew. He'd been flying since he was 11 and he'd always been good at it, that at least the bindings hadn't affected, because being a seeker was a physical skill and there was a limit to how much magical suppression could interfere with the relationship between a person and a broomstick. But there was a difference now between flying well and flying like this, with the full awareness of his expanded senses informing every movement, every gust of wind, every position of every player on the field legible to him at distance. He found the snitch in 11 minutes, which was the fastest time in any house game in 4 years. He didn't take the shortest path to it, he took the path that was interesting, that involved 3 feints and a vertical climb that left the Slytherin seeker, Draco Malfoy, flat-footed twice in quick succession. He landed with the snitch and heard the crowd and looked up to find Malfoy hovering 20 feet above him with an expression of genuine, unperformed outrage. There's no way, Malfoy started. There's a way, Harry said. You just couldn't see it. He walked off the pitch. Behind him, Gryffindor celebrated with the volume of people who had needed something to cheer about. Umbridge tried 3 times to use her authority to remove Harry from the team, citing various invented infractions, and 3 times found herself in a conversation with McGonagall that was so quietly and professionally immovable that the experience was apparently similar to trying to push over a mountain. Harry was aware of this via Hermione's intelligence network, which was considerably more organized than any formal intelligence operation. Hermione knew what happened in every corridor within about 40 minutes of its happening. The Patronus lesson landed in mid-November. 23 DA members produced corporeal patron uses in a single session. Harry had built to it carefully, 3 weeks of preparation, foundational work that they might not have recognized as preparation but that created exactly the right conditions for the breakthrough. He moved through the room as the silver shapes came into existence, a rabbit, a tortoiseshell cat, something that might have been a bear but was possibly a large friendly badger, and felt the room fill with the particular quality of light that Patronus magic produces. Neville's Patronus arrived last. It came slowly, with effort, Neville's brow furrowed and his wand shaking slightly, and then it was there, fully formed, a medium-sized dog with the blocky determination of a terrier, padding around Neville's feet with comfortable certainty. Neville looked down at it. His expression did something Harry was glad he got to see. There it is, Harry said, standing beside him. My Gran's going to think I made it up, Neville said, slightly breathless. No she won't, Harry said. You're going to show her at Christmas and she's going to be insufferable about it to everyone she knows. Neville laughed, which the dog seemed to approve of, circling once before dissolving. The Quibbler piece came out in December. Luna appeared in the common room one evening with a copy of the magazine, right side up for once, and set it in front of Harry. On the cover was a photograph of Harry looking entirely composed, taken at some point when he hadn't known a photograph was being taken, at breakfast, he thought, based on the background, and the headline read, The Boy Who Lived Tells All, exclusive, what really happened in the graveyard. My dad ran it as the cover story, Luna said. Harry picked it up and read it. It was his account, verbatim, every detail, the ritual, Cedric's death, Voldemort's resurrection, the duel. He'd given it to Luna 4 weeks ago for exactly this purpose, choosing the Quibbler over the Prophet with deliberate purpose. The Quibbler was considered eccentric and so the Ministry hadn't yet moved to control it. By tomorrow morning they would have moved to control it. "Thank your father for me," Harry said. "He says you're welcome," Luna said. "He also says the nargles around your aura have cleared considerably since the start of term, which he considers very promising." "I'll take it," Harry said. The Ministry's response was predictably overreactive. Umbridge banned the Quibbler from school premises by Educational Decree 37 the following morning, which had the immediate and entirely foreseeable consequence that every student in Hogwarts wanted to read it urgently, and the copies circulated through the school with the efficient invisibility of things that are technically contraband and therefore fascinating. By the end of the week, Harry estimated that 2/3 of the school had read it, and by the end of the following week, Hermione reported that owls had been arriving at Hogwarts from Hogwarts parents asking questions. "You planned that," Hermione said, not accusingly. With a sort of professional appreciation. "The Quibbler has 3 times the readership of the Prophet among younger families," Harry said. "Less institutional trust, more actual reading." She looked at him. "When did you become strategic?" "When I had room to think," he said. Snape asked Harry to stay after potions in the second week of December. Harry stayed. The rest of the class filed out with the relief that always accompanied the end of a potions lesson, and the dungeon went quiet around them, and Snape stood at his desk looking at Harry with the expression of a man who has made several decisions about what he's going to say and is revising them. "Sit down, Potter," he said. Harry sat. He was aware of the shift in Snape's magical signature. The usual cold armor of it was present, but underneath it something was different. Careful. Considered. "I know about your group," Snape said. "Most people do," Harry said. "I know what you're teaching," Snape said. "And the level at which you're teaching it." He paused. He looked like the words were being extracted from him with some effort. "You have 23 students who can produce corporeal patron uses. You have 11 who are performing shield work at a NEWT level. And you personally are operating at," he stopped. "Say it," Harry said. "You are operating at a level that does not correspond to anything you should be capable of at 15, Snape said. He looked at Harry steadily. "I am not talking about enthusiasm or hard work. I am talking about fundamental magical capacity." "I know," Harry said. "The bindings," Snape said. Harry looked at him carefully. "You knew about them." It wasn't quite a question. Snape was quiet for a moment. "I suspected," he said finally. "I had no confirmation. I noticed the suppression signature in your second year, during a clemency work I conducted on the headmaster's behalf." He paused. "I did not ask Dumbledore about it directly because at the time I lacked the standing to ask that question and expect an honest answer." "But you suspected he'd placed them," Harry said. "I suspected the kind of long-term strategic thinking the headmaster excels at had been applied to you in ways that you were unaware of," Snape said, which was the most diplomatic construction Harry had ever heard him use. "Yes. And now?" "And now they're gone," Snape said, "and the fact of their absence changes certain things about the occlumency Umbridge will undoubtedly request I teach you." Harry looked at him. "She's asked you?" "She will," Snape said. "The Ministry wants your mind accessible to the Dark Lord. Umbridge doesn't know that's what she'd be facilitating, she simply wants you vulnerable. But the practical effect of poor occlumency instruction is the same either way." He straightened slightly. "I will teach you properly." Harry held his gaze. "Why?" Snape was silent for a long enough moment that Harry thought he might not answer. Then, "Because the bindings are gone and what comes next requires you to have defenses that work. And because," he stopped again. Then, with the specific discomfort of someone forcing honesty out through instincts that resist it, "because I have spent 17 years in a position that requires me to watch the consequences of Dumbledore's long plans come to life in individual human beings. I am tired of watching that. You could just teach me a clemency to annoy Umbridge, Harry said. Something moved in Snape's expression that might, under other circumstances, have been the beginning of something like a smile. That would be a secondary benefit, he allowed. Tuesday evenings. Harry said. Tuesday evenings, Snape said. Harry stood, picked up his bag. Professor, he said, at the door. Snape looked up. I know about my mother, Harry said. About what she meant to you. I think you should know that I'm not interested in holding it against you. Whatever you did or didn't do in the past doesn't define what comes next. He held Snape's gaze. I'd rather have you on the right side of this than feel correctly resentful about old choices. Snape looked at him for a long, still moment. Get out of my classroom, Potter, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. Harry left. The session before the Christmas holidays was the dies best yet. Harry had them running combat sequences, not against dummies but against each other, controlled and well supervised, the kind of practical experience that turns theoretical knowledge into instinct. The room crackled with 40 students simultaneously working at the edge of their capability, and the noise of it was extraordinary, the specific joyful chaos of people discovering they were better than they thought. He stood at the center of it and watched them, and felt the shape of what was being built here, not just skill but confidence, and not just confidence but the particular kind that comes from knowing you've earned it. Neville was running a pair of third years through basic shield work in the corner, explaining it with the patient clarity of someone who has recently learned a thing and therefore remembers what it's like not to know it. Harry watched him for a moment. Ron came to stand beside him, slightly sweaty, having just finished a sequences drill with Seamus Finnegan. You know what this is, right? Ron said quietly. What? This is what you do, Ron said. He gestured at the room, the 40 students, the silver light of patron uses and the warm glow of shield charms and Neville's patient explanation in the corner. This. Leading people. You've always done it, it's just, before, it looked like running toward danger alone. This is the same thing but better. Harry looked at the room. This is what we do, he said. Not me. Ron looked at him. Yeah, he said, after a moment. Yeah, all right. The train back to London for Christmas was rowdy and warm, the compartment full of people who had something to look forward to returning to in January, which was a better quality of departure than the end of any previous term Harry could remember. Luna was reading the Quibbler upside down again. Neville was writing something to his grandmother with an expression of concentrated pride. Ron was already asleep, his feet on Hermione's side of the seat in a territorial maneuver she was pretending not to notice while clearly noticing. Hermione was looking out the window. Okay? Harry asked. She looked at him. I keep thinking about what the year looks like from Voldemort's side, she said quietly. He's had 6 months to rebuild. The Ministry is his unwitting ally. And we're a student defense club. A very good one, Harry said. Harry. Hermione. He held her gaze. 6 months ago I woke up in a graveyard with 38 bindings broken and a new understanding of how this war was always supposed to go. I've spent 6 months building something different. He paused. We're not a student defense club. We're the beginning of the actual resistance. There's a difference. She was quiet, looking at him. Besides, he said. He doesn't know what I am yet. Not really. He knows the bindings broke. He knows I'm more than he thought. But he doesn't know what I've been doing with it. He's planning for the Harry Potter from the graveyard. He looked out the window at the darkening winter countryside sliding past. By the time he meets the actual version, it'll be too late to adjust. Luna lowered the Quibbler. The blibbering humdingers are in his favor this winter, she said conversationally. Everyone looked at her. Probably, she added, and went back to her reading. Ron woke up long enough to say, what, and then fell asleep again. Harry laughed, and the train carried them south through the cold English night, and somewhere outside the window the war was building towards something that none of them could see the full shape of yet, and in the warm light of the compartment that didn't feel like fear. It felt like readiness. Chapter 5, Into the Department of Mysteries. The dream was different this time. Harry had been having Voldemort's dreams since second year in one form or another, the connection between them a two-way street that had always run more traffic in one direction than the other. But since the graveyard, since the Horcrux had broken and the bindings with it, the dreams had changed character. Less invasion, more observation. Less Voldemort pushing through and more Harry standing at a distance watching, the way you watch something through glass, present but not submerged. So when the Ministry dream arrived in March, he knew it was a trap immediately. He sat up in bed and the dormitory settled around him, Ron's breathing slow and regular, the pre-dawn dark, the specific silence of Hogwarts at 4 in the morning. He pressed his fingers to his forehead, not from pain, the scar barely registered anymore, the connection between them too damaged by the Horcrux's destruction to carry real sensation, and thought about what he'd just seen. A long black corridor. A door at the end. Behind the door, something important, something that mattered to him specifically. The dream hadn't specified what. But it had implied Sirius, the particular quality of implication that Voldemort had learned to deploy against him, not a direct statement but a suggestion, something that activated the specific frequency of Harry's loyalty and let it do the work. The dream had been constructed. He could feel the craftsmanship of it, the way a good forgery carries the signature of the forger in the very deliberateness of its accuracy. He got dressed quietly and went to find Hermione. She was in the common room at 4:15, which was unusual even for her, but she'd been sleeping badly since November and had developed a habit of early morning study sessions that she maintained were productive and that Harry privately thought were anxiety management with better branding. She looked up when he came down the stairs and took one look at his face. "Voldemort," she said. "The Ministry," he said. "Department of Mysteries. He wants me to go there." She put her quill down. "He showed you Sirius." "Implied Sirius," Harry said. "He's smarter than that. If he'd shown me something specific, I'd know exactly where to check and I'd have checked already and the trip would be unnecessary. The implication is better, it leaves enough uncertainty that the rational response is to go and look." "But you know it's a trap," she said. "Yes," Harry said. He sat down across from her. "But that's the thing about traps. Knowing it's a trap doesn't automatically mean you don't walk in. Not if the bait is someone you'd die for." Hermione was quiet, looking at him with those calculating eyes. "Is Sirius actually in danger?" "Let me check," Harry said. He closed his eyes and reached out along the connection he'd been developing all year, not legilimency, not exactly, but the expanded awareness that Moody had been training and that Snape's occlumency sessions had inadvertently refined in both directions. He found Sirius's signature at Grimmauld Place, warm and irregular and absolutely alive, asleep from the feel of it, the specific magical texture of unconscious rest. "He's fine," Harry said, opening his eyes. "Home. Asleep." Hermione's shoulders dropped slightly. "So it's definitely a trap." "Definitely a trap," Harry confirmed. "Which raises the question of why Voldemort thinks it'll work on me now, when he saw in the graveyard that I'm not the same as I was. He thought about it. He's counting on the one constant. He knows I won't let the people I love be threatened without responding. He's not trying to manipulate my judgment, he's trying to circumvent it entirely by going through my loyalty." "That's very sophisticated," Hermione said, sounding genuinely grudging about it. "He's very sophisticated," Harry said. "He's also been doing this for 50 years. He looked at her. "Here's what I think. He has something in the Department of Mysteries that he needs and can't get himself. Something that requires me specifically to retrieve it. The prophecy." Hermione went very still. "It's in there," Harry said. "I can feel it when I push against that part of the dream, there's a real element underneath the constructed trap, something that actually exists behind that door. A record of the full prophecy. Trelawney only told Dumbledore the beginning and Voldemort only heard part of it. The full version is in a glass ball in the Hall of Prophecy. He paused. And only the subject of a prophecy can retrieve it without being driven mad. So he needs you to go there, Hermione said slowly. And pick it up. And then his people take it from me, Harry said. Simple. Elegant. And if I happen to die in the process, that's fine with him because the Horcrux is already destroyed. He sat back. He doesn't fully understand yet that I know about the Horcruxes. He still thinks my death is complicated for him. So he's designed this to be a retrieval, not an execution. We're not going, Hermione said flatly. I'm going, Harry said. She opened her mouth. Listen, he said. He needs the prophecy. As long as he doesn't have it, he's operating on partial information about the one thing that defines this war's endpoint. That's leverage we have. I'm going to go to the ministry and I'm going to make sure he doesn't get it. He held her gaze. But I'm not going as the person he thinks he's luring. I'm going on my terms, with preparation, and I'm taking whoever I can convince to come. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. He'll have Death Eaters there, she said. Yes. Probably a lot of them. Probably, Harry agreed. That's fine. Harry, Hermione. His voice was even and warm and entirely certain. I know what I'm doing. I know what I can do. I'm not asking for permission and I'm not interested in being talked out of it, I'm telling you what's happening so you can choose whether you're in or out. He looked at her steadily. And I think we both know which one you're going to choose. She looked at him for a long moment, and the expression on her face moved through several things and came out the other side of them. When? She said. Tonight, he said. I want to be done with this. By 8 in the morning, Ron, Neville, Luna, and Ginny had all been told, all in the same direct and information-complete way, all given the same genuine choice. By 9, all 5 of them had said yes. By 10, Harry had a plan laid out on parchment that Hermione had covered in so many annotations it looked like marginalia had consumed the original document. The Thestrals, Luna said, at 11, over breakfast, as though they'd been discussing something entirely ordinary. We could fly to London. The Thestrals respond to me particularly well. They respond to anyone who can see them, Hermione said. They respond to me particularly well, Luna repeated serenely. Thestrals, Harry said. Yes. Good. What time does the ministry close to regular visitors? 6, Hermione said. But the atrium's accessible by flow all night for emergency access. We're not using the atrium, Harry said. The visitor entrance. The red phone box. Minimal magical signature, controlled entry, easier to assess what we're walking into before we're inside. Snape happened to walk past the end of the Gryffindor table at this point, and the particular quality of Harry's posture, the maps, the parchment, the focused assembly of people, made him stop. His eyes went to Harry's face. Potter, he said, quietly enough that only the group heard. My office. After dinner. I'll be there, Harry said. Snape moved on. Ron watched him go. Should we be worried that Snape is interested in our plan? No, Harry said. Just checking, Ron said, and went back to his eggs. After dinner Snape's office was empty of students, which was unusual given that it was a Tuesday, and Harry arrived to find Snape standing at his desk with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting and rehearsing simultaneously. You're going to the ministry tonight, Snape said. Yes, Harry said. The Department of Mysteries. Yes. You believe the prophecy is there, Snape said. And you believe the Dark Lord has set this up to retrieve it through you. Harry looked at him carefully. How much do you know about what he's planning? Snape was quiet for a moment. The firelight from the grate moved across his face in the specific low-light way of dungeon rooms. I have been a double agent for 17 years, he said. I know a great deal about what he plans. I do not always know the timing. He met Harry's eyes. He called the inner circle 3 days ago. I was not in attendance. I have been maintaining careful distance since his return because my usefulness in that capacity depends on not being associated with you too closely. A pause. But I have sources. He is sending the 12 best he has. I know, Harry said. Snape's jaw tightened fractionally. You know, and you're still going, yes, Harry said. Because the alternative is he eventually gets the prophecy another way, or he plants this trap again with better bait, or he decides to stop being clever and just go after someone I love directly. He looked at Snape steadily. 12 Death Eaters is a lot. But I know the building layout, I know they're coming, and I have 6 people who have spent 7 months training for exactly this kind of situation. 5 of them are students, Snape said tightly. They chose to come, Harry said. Each of them. Knowing exactly what it is. He held Snape's gaze. They're not being brought into danger. They're choosing to walk into it. There's a difference, and I think you of all people understand the significance of that difference. Snape looked at him for a long time. I am going to alert Dumbledore, Snape said. I expected you would, Harry said. That's fine. Tell him we're going regardless and ask him to have the order ready for cleanup. He moved toward the door. We could use backup. Just not instead of us. We're doing this. Potter. Snape's voice stopped him at the door, and there was something in the register of it that Harry had never heard from him before, not warmth exactly, because Snape didn't do warmth in any conventional sense, but something with the same function. Be careful. Harry turned and looked at him. You too, he said. Whatever you're about to do tonight, be careful. Snape looked at him for a moment and said nothing, and Harry went. The Thestrals were in the paddock at the edge of the Forbidden Forest and they came to Luna immediately, as she'd predicted, their skeletal forms materializing from the dark of the trees with the particular silent quality of creatures that exist in the margin between visible and invisible. Harry ran his hand along the neck of the nearest one and felt the texture of it, the cool solidity of something that looks like absence but isn't. Right, he said to the group. If you haven't done this before, the key is to trust that it's there. Don't reach for the reins like you're expecting nothing. It's there. I've done it before, Ginny said, already swinging up onto one with the ease of someone for whom flying on anything is fundamentally fine. I feel sick, Neville said. You'll be fine in the air, Harry said. You always are. That's Quidditch, Neville said. Same principle, Harry said. He mounted his own Thestral and it shifted its weight in the way of something readying itself. Stay close. Don't light anything until we're inside. When we get there, nobody does anything until I do. Questions? What's the plan for the Death Eaters? Ron asked from somewhere to his right, his voice carrying the particular quality of someone trying to sound casual about something that isn't. Let them show themselves first, Harry said. Once we're in the Hall of Prophecy, they'll move. I want to know who's there before I commit to anything. And the prophecy itself? Hermione asked. I pick it up, Harry said. It shatters or it doesn't. And then we make sure it doesn't end up in Voldemort's hands regardless of what state it's in. He looked around at 5 faces in the dark, lit by the thin light of a half-moon through breaking cloud. This is going to be fine. You're either being truthful or you're being the world's most effective liar, Ron said. Little of both, Harry admitted. Go. The Thestrals rose. The flight to London took less than an hour. The city came up beneath them enormous and lit, the Thames catching the orange glow of 1,000 streetlights, the buildings compact and indifferent in the way of cities that have been there a long time and have accommodated a great many things. They came in from the east, low, and the cool March air had the metallic edge of late winter. Harry landed them in a side street off Whitehall and they dismounted and straightened their robes and looked at each other. Nobody saw the Thestrals, Luna said helpfully. No one can see them, Hermione said. Yes, but they'd have noticed the landing, Luna said. The air displacement. We were very quiet. Ron looked at Harry. She's actually useful in ways I don't fully understand. Most useful people are, Harry said. Come on. The red phone box was exactly where it was supposed to be, slightly grimy, its light working but dim. Harry opened it and they filed in, which required close proximity and Neville pressing himself against the wall with the expression of a man accepting physical reality with grace. Harry dialed the number. The mechanical voice asked for names and purpose. Harry Potter, he said. Department of Mysteries. A pause. Then the badges dropped. Visitor to the Ministry of Magic. Purpose, retrieval. The box sank. The atrium at night was a different building from the atrium in the day. Empty, the flue fireplaces dark except for the duty ones, the fountain in the center of the space standing silent with its sculptures frozen in the stillness of after hours. Harry felt the building around them the way he felt all large magical structures, the enchantments in the walls, the security matrices, the monitoring charms on the main corridors. He found the monitoring charm on level 9 and dismantled it in approximately 4 seconds, not because it was simple but because he understood its structure from the outside the way you understand a lock you can see the mechanism of. Hermione made a quiet sound. What? Ron asked. Nothing, she said. I'll tell you later. Level 9 was reached by lift, which descended with the particular slow institutional gravity of lifts in important buildings, and when the doors opened the corridor was exactly as Harry had seen it in the dreams, black, low-ceilinged, the doors set into the walls without handles. The floor absorbed sound. The torches on the walls burned with a blue-white flame that wasn't warm. Harry stopped at the corridor's entrance and held the group still with a raised hand, and listened with everything he had. 12 magical signatures. He found them in about 3 seconds of careful attention, distributed through the space beyond the circular room, placed strategically, for at the far entrance to the Hall of Prophecy, for split between 2 side corridors, for held in reserve near the brain room. Professional placement. Lucius Malfoy's signature was one he recognized from the graveyard, cold and controlled, and he was at the Hall of Prophecy entrance. The others he could feel but not name. He turned to the group and held up all 10 fingers, then 2 more. Confirmed 12. Hermione's eyes went wide for just a moment and then steadied. Harry pointed to himself, then forward. Then he made a gesture that indicated the group should spread, take different approaches, converge at the Hall of Prophecy from multiple directions. They'd drilled this, not this specific scenario but the underlying principle of convergent approach, and they understood. Neville took Ron left. Luna took Hermione right. Ginny stayed with Harry. You sure about me? Ginny murmured, barely sound. You're the second fastest I've got, Harry said equally quietly. Yes. They moved. The circular room rotated when they entered it, as Harry had expected, and he stopped it with a word he'd found in an obscure text on spatial enchantments and had been saving since January. The doors fixed in place. The room settled. Through the second door, the Hall of Prophecy opened up around them, a cathedral-sized space with shelves stretching to a ceiling lost in darkness, every shelf lined with glowing glass orbs, each one containing a life, a future, a statement made by someone who stood outside normal time. The orbs made a sound, barely audible, a faint collective whisper that was tens of thousands of prophecies all speaking at once beneath hearing. Harry walked to the row Voldemort had shown him. Row 97. Shelf 23. The orb was there, smaller than he'd imagined, pulsing with a pale inner light. The label below it read, in very small script, SPT to APWBD Dark Lord and Harry Potter. He picked it up. It was warm. The warmth moved through his palm and up his arm and he felt the prophecy in it, not its content, not yet, just the fact of it, the sense of something very true compressed into very small space. Then the lights went out. Every orb in the hall went dark simultaneously, which shouldn't have been possible, and in the absolute blackness that followed Harry heard the sound of 12 people moving in coordinated silence, and he reached back and put the orb in his jacket pocket and said very clearly, to everyone in the room he couldn't see, now. The hall exploded. Ginny's reductor curses came from Harry's left, 3 in rapid sequence, each precisely placed because Ginny didn't waste spells the way less economical fighters did. The Death Eaters broke formation immediately because sustained coordinated attack from a direction they hadn't accounted for makes formation untenable. Harry moved forward and to the right, using the shelves as cover and orienting entirely by magical signature because sight was irrelevant right now. He found the first Death Eater by signature and by sound and cast a binding so precisely weighted that it wrapped the man without breaking the shelf beside him. Shelves mattered, shattered shelves meant shattered prophecies, and while Harry was not sentimental about the specific prophecy in his pocket, this room was a record of human futures and he was disinclined to destroy it unnecessarily. The second Death Eater tried a flanking approach and found Harry already turned, already moving, the shield going up with the specific tight geometry of someone who didn't need extra margin because their placement was exact. The curse hit the shield and bent sideways into the far wall and the returning spell caught the Death Eater in the shoulder and sat him down hard. Then Ron's voice came from the left entrance and it sounded like trouble. Harry moved. 3 Death Eaters had engaged Neville and Ron at the entrance and the numbers were wrong, the pair of them were handling it with the competence of 7 months of hard training but competence against odds that were 1.5 to 1 has a time limit. Harry crossed half the hall in 6 seconds, using the space the way he'd learned to use the graveyard's ruined landscape, obstacles as advantages, geometry as weapon. He came in from above, launching himself over a shelf with the effortless physical ease that came from a year of combined Quidditch and Moody's training, and 2 of the 3 Death Eaters had the disorienting experience of a threat arriving from a vertical angle they hadn't covered. The third turned to cover the new arrival and found Neville already there. Neville's shield work at any WT level, at this close range, with this particular clarity of motivation, was formidable. The Death Eater bounced off it so hard he hit a shelf. Ron hit him with a stunning spell before he'd finished falling. "You okay?" Harry asked. "Grand," Neville said, slightly breathless but steady-eyed. Harry turned back to the hall. Lucius Malfoy was standing at the center of the space, and he'd done something clever, he'd gotten the orbs lit again, not all of them but enough, a warm shifting glow that made the shadows mobile and unreliable. He was using it. Harry had to give him that. "Potter," Malfoy said, his voice carrying the drawling ease of a man who has been powerful long enough to have it as a reflex. "You know what I'm here for." "I do," Harry said. "Give me the prophecy," Malfoy said, "and this can end without further unpleasantness." "I've heard the end you're offering," Harry said, moving slowly around the edge of the space, keeping Malfoy tracking. Behind Malfoy, he could feel Hermione and Luna converging from 2 separate approaches. "It involves Voldemort getting information that'll make him more dangerous." "So no. You can't fight all of us," Malfoy said. "I've already accounted for 9 of your 12, Harry said. "You're 1, and I see 2 more somewhere behind the thought room entrance. That's 12. So actually," he paused. "Yes, I can." Malfoy processed that. His composed expression didn't break but it did recalculate visibly, the slight tightening around the eyes of a man realizing the numbers aren't what they were. "You've been counting," he said. "Since we walked in," Harry said. Malfoy raised his wand. He was good, Harry had expected good, because the Death Eaters Voldemort sent on this kind of mission were not decorative. He was fast and precise and his spell selection was intelligent, not the showy hexes of someone trying to impress but the tight functional combat magic of a man who had been doing this for 20 years. Harry was better. Not by much, in terms of raw technique, Malfoy's technique was excellent. But Harry had the awareness advantage, the constant three-dimensional map of every person in the room, and he was fighting with zero hesitation while Malfoy was fighting with the slight half-beat delay of a man who was expecting resistance but not quite this quality of resistance. Harry moved continuously. Never still, never predictable, always angled so that his position cost Malfoy while Malfoy's position cost Malfoy less. He caught 2 curses on the shield and redirected both and kept coming, and Malfoy gave ground, professionally, in good order, but he gave ground. Then Luna did something entirely unexpected. She had come at the 2 Death Eaters at the Thought Room entrance from behind and dealt with them using a combination of Confundus and a specialized binding charm that Harry had never taught anyone in the DA because he'd assumed it was too complex, and which Luna appeared to have developed independently or found somewhere, and the 2 of them sat down in a fog of confusion looking profoundly uncertain about their own names. Hermione hit Malfoy with a full-strength Petrificus Totalis from his unguarded side the moment he tracked the sound of Luna's approach. Malfoy hit the floor rigid. The hall went quiet. Harry stood in the center of it and listened. 12 signatures, all accounted for, all horizontal. He checked twice because thoroughness mattered. "Clear," he said. The group came together in the center of the hall, all slightly battered, all entirely present. Ginny had a burn along her left forearm where a curse had glanced off a shelf edge and hit her. Ron's lip was split. Neville was standing completely straight, which he'd started doing around November and now seemed permanent. Hermione was looking at the bodies on the floor with an expression of complex moral processing that Harry recognized as her cataloging the ethics of what they'd just done while simultaneously acknowledging the necessity. "Luna," Harry said. "Those 2 by the Thought Room. What was that binding?" Luna looked up from examining an interesting-looking prophecy orb she'd picked up. "Oh, I modified the standard Incarcerus," she said. "I find the standard one has a tendency to tighten under resistance, which seems unnecessarily cruel. This one just stays. Can you teach it?" "Of course," she said, setting the orb back in its place with gentle precision. Harry took the prophecy out of his pocket and looked at it. It glowed steadily, warm and certain, something very final in the quality of its light. "I should listen to it," he said. "Here." Hermione said. "Before I break it," he said. "If I break it." He held it for a moment, feeling the warmth of it, the compression of something true made physical. Then he brought it to ear level and listened, and the voice that came from it was thin and distant and it told him everything Dumbledore had already told him and one thing Dumbledore hadn't. He lowered the orb. "What did it say?" Ron asked. "What I already knew," Harry said. "Mostly." He paused. "It said the power the Dark Lord knows not. I always assumed that was love. Dumbledore said it was love." He looked at the orb. "It's not love. I mean, love is part of it. But the thing Voldemort genuinely can't comprehend isn't love. It's choice." He closed his hand around the orb. "He's never made a free choice in his life. Every decision he's ever made has been driven by fear or by compulsion or by the logic of what he'd already set himself to be. He can't understand choosing to be something different because he's never done it." He looked at his friends. "That's the power he knows not. It's why the killing curse keeps bouncing. He fires it expecting a fixed outcome and instead he hits someone who is actually free." The hall was very quiet. "That's," Hermione started, and stopped, and then said, "Yes. That's right." Harry looked at the orb for one more moment. Then he put it in his pocket. He wasn't going to break it here. The information in it was his, and he'd decide what to do with it later when he wasn't standing in a room full of unconscious Death Eaters. "We should move," Neville said. "Yes," Harry said. "Up to the atrium. The order should be," he felt them before he heard them. A dozen new signatures, coming down from above, the flues activating in rapid sequence, familiar ones. Kingsley, Tonks, Moody, and several others. And at the front of the formation, most powerful and most complex, Dumbledore. And behind them, from above, the cold institutional weight of Cornelius Fudge. "The minister's here," Harry said. "Perfect," Hermione said, with an expression that wasn't a smile but was making a start on it. "Actually perfect." They went up. The atrium was full. Order members had spread out through the space, checking corners, establishing presence, and in the center of all of it stood Dumbledore in midnight blue robes with his wand in his hand, and across from him, flanked by 3 Aurors, stood Cornelius Fudge in his lime green bowler hat, and Fudge's face was doing something very interesting. He was looking at Harry. Harry was looking back at him. Fudge looked at Harry Potter, alive, uninjured, standing in the Ministry of Magic in the middle of the night with 5 DA members at his back and 12 unconscious Death Eaters in the Hall of Prophecy below, and the expression that crossed his face in that moment was the expression of a very small man watching a very large piece of his reality become untenable. "He's here," one of Fudge's Aurors said quietly, unnecessarily. "I can see that," Fudge said tightly. "Minister," Harry said, stepping forward. His voice was perfectly pleasant, the tone of someone at a conversation rather than a confrontation. "I'm glad you're here, actually. There are 12 Death Eaters in the Hall of Prophecy who'll be coming out of various states of incapacitation in the next hour. You'll want to get them processed before then." Fudge stared at him. "Lucius Malfoy is one of them," Harry said. "I imagine that's complicated for you, given your personal relationship." "I'm sorry for that." He paused. "Not very sorry, but a bit." Fudge opened his mouth. "And Voldemort is alive," Harry said, still pleasantly, "which I understand you've been publicly disputing. I'm going to make it easy for you and let you publicly agree with that now rather than in 6 months when he does something impossible to ignore. Early agreement is much better for everyone. Including you." Dumbledore's mouth was doing something that was trying very hard not to be a smile. "This is," Fudge started. "True," Harry said. "All of it." He took the prophecy orb from his pocket and held it up. "This is what his Death Eaters came for. The full prophecy about Voldemort and me. They wanted me to retrieve it and hand it over. I retrieved it and I'm keeping it." He looked at Fudge directly. "I'll expect the formal exoneration of Sirius Black on my desk within a week, by the way. There's no justification for his continued wanted status and I think we both know it." Fudge's face had gone through several colors. Kingsley Shacklebolt, standing to Dumbledore's right, was staring at the middle distance with the focused expression of someone processing several things very rapidly. "Right," Tonks said, from somewhere on the left flank. Her hair was pink tonight and she sounded genuinely delighted. "I'll go start on the Death Eaters, shall I?" Sirius arrived 20 minutes later. He'd been owed by someone in the Order, Harry suspected Tonks, who had a gift for the logistically satisfying moment, and he came through the flue with his dark hair wild and his robes put on in a hurry and the expression of a man who had been woken with information that he was processing while still horizontal and hadn't finished processing yet. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. "You went to the Department of Mysteries," Sirius said. "Yes," Harry said. "Alone, with 5 people," Harry said. "Not alone. At night," Sirius said. "Against 12 Death Eaters. Because of a dream that was obviously a trap." "Yes," Harry said. "Because it was a trap involving you, and I'm not willing to sit on that kind of risk even when I know it's constructed. Not where you're concerned." Sirius looked at him for a very long moment in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, surrounded by Order members and Aurors and a minister in the process of a significant political crisis. Then he pulled Harry forward by the back of the head and pressed his forehead against the top of Harry's hair in the particular grip of someone who needed to hold something real for a moment. Harry let him. He put one hand briefly on Sirius's arm and felt the realness of him, warm and present and unambiguously alive, and let that settle. "The exoneration's on the table," Harry said, into Sirius's shoulder. "Give it a week." Sirius made a sound that was laugh and something else together. "You told Fudge to exonerate me." "Told him a week or I'd make everything worse for him," Harry said. "He'll do it. He doesn't have any capital left to spend on obstruction." He pulled back. "You'll be able to go home. Your actual home, not Grimmauld Place." Sirius's expression did something enormous and quiet. "Where?" James and Lily's house in, too many memories, maybe, Harry said. Wherever you want. I have access to the Potter accounts. I've had access since I turned 14 and got the suppression binding off the inheritance clause. We'll figure it out. Sirius stared at him. You have the Potter accounts. Since November, Harry said. I should have mentioned it. You should have, Sirius started, laughing now, genuinely, with the particular helplessness of someone overwhelmed by benign developments. Harry. I know, Harry said. Come on. Dumbledore needs to talk to Fudge, and that conversation will go better if you're visible and alive while it happens. They walked back into the center of the atrium together. Dumbledore looked at Harry as he approached, and the look was layered: pride, guilt, assessment, and something closer to peace than Harry had seen on his face before, as though the rearranging of plans that had been happening since September had reached a point where the new configuration was finally becoming visible to the man who'd had to let go of the old one. The Hall of Prophecy? Dumbledore asked quietly. 12 unconscious, none permanent, Harry said. The hall itself is intact. I was careful. Dumbledore looked at him, and then at the 5 members of the DA standing at Harry's back, and then at Sirius, and then back at more actions Claude Sonnet 4.